All right. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Nick Caputo. I'm here with Tom Seager, and we have a lot of things to talk about in the realm of cold exposure. Welcome, Tom. Very excited to meet you and to chop it up with you on this podcast episode. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Nick.
For sure. So just for some context, everybody, I've been following Tom for a decent amount of time now. I'd say a little over a year, maybe even closer to 2 years. And I've learned a lot from his content about cold exposure, and I'm looking forward to picking his brain on some details related to a lot of the things that I've seen on his Instagram. As most of you know from me, Instagram is a platform where you only get to say so much. So I like the podcast format because we really get to go into detail and give you guys some serious value here. So just an introduction for Tom. Tom P. Seager, PhD, teaches engineering business practices at Arizona State University and is a co-founder of the Morozko Forge Ice Bath Company. Dr. Seager's earned his PhD in environmental engineering at Clarkson University in Potsdam, New York. He published over 180 research articles. He's been cited in scientific journals over 8,000 times and has won over $5 million in research funding from the National Science Foundation, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the U.S. Department of Defense. His expertise in resilient infrastructure systems and environmental sustainability has made him a popular speaker and a consultant to the Army Corps of Engineers and the Office of Naval Research. Nonetheless, Dr. Seager's teachings in leadership, entrepreneurship, organizational communication, and human resilience have prompted him to reorganize his career around a novel concept called self-actual engineering, in which he applies engineering principles to a fuller realization of human potential. Informed by his own transformational health journey, Dr. Seager's most recent research reveals the relationship between deliberate cold exposure and human well-being. And that is what we're here to talk about today. So I have many questions for you. I'm going to try to keep this conversation as organized as possible for the viewers. We can go topic by topic. I know the one that everybody is going to be waiting for is the one on testosterone, but I want to save that to a little bit later because I want to build up to that. So to start things off, let's just cover the basics for people who are completely unfamiliar with the topic or anything. So the first question I want to ask you is, how would you define cold thermogenesis? We see this term thrown a lot. How would you define that?
It's a really good question. There are a bunch of content creators, and they've all struggled to find a term that sets them apart from the rest. So Wim Hof, he's the Iceman, and it's all about the ice. But when you listen to Huberman, he's going to use a phrase that I like a lot called deliberate cold exposure. The emphasis there is on deliberate. Accidental cold exposure, we're not looking for that. But when you do it with intention, it makes all the difference in the world. Then you got Ben Greenfield, who's well known for his ice baths, and he uses the term cold thermogenesis. So it doesn't take long when you're sorting through social media to get confused. Everybody's talking about the same thing with a little bit different intention or context. Huberman, with the deliberate, he's saying you're after something, you're working on something, you have an objective. Greenfield saying cold thermogenesis, he's talking about activating that process in your body that is trying to defend your core temperature. So whether you get cold in the air or whether you get cold in the water, you're going to create primarily two systems of generating your own heat. One is the muscle shivering, and the other is activation of brown fat for what's called non-shivering thermogenesis. So, and then Wim is, he gives this extreme sports, sort of extreme environment vibe. And that's why he emphasizes the ice. All of these things, they don't really need to be distinguished from one another. But it does depend, what are you working on? If you're working on your metabolism, then you don't actually have to get that cold. You don't need to be Wim Hof. You don't need the ice. Most people are going to activate their brown fat and get some of that cold thermogenesis that Ben Greenfield is talking about if the water is like in the 50s. If you feel a little gasp reflex, and you feel a little shock getting in, it's cold enough. For me, 50s is boring. I've been doing this for so much that, if it's not 39 degrees, then I could just splash around in there all day. For me, I really got to get into the ice bath. I got to have those chunks of ice. And part of that is because it's not just about metabolism. It's also about psychology. And that's where Huberman, the neuroscientist, comes in. When you're deliberately putting yourself into a situation that gives you that anxiety response, you're doing more than activating brown fat, than just revving up your metabolism. You're also working your autonomic nervous system. You're building vagal tone. You're improving heart rate variability. You're building psychological resilience. So when I say they're all talking about the same things, it's true. But then when we want to tease apart different emphases in a cold practice, that's going to suggest that we do it in different ways, different temperatures, different durations, different medium. And we can talk about those.
Okay. Wow, that was a great explanation. Very thorough. Appreciate that. So I definitely want to unpack some of the things that you briefly mentioned. I already have in my outline that I want to go over. But I think it is interesting to note that everyone is kind of, I guess, talking about the same thing when they make, these different terms. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So it's good to know that everyone is kind of talking about the same thing. However, I guess it does also make sense that there's differences in what effect it has on you depending on how cold the water is or what your intentions are. And I've seen some different data about that. So I'm glad you clarified that right off rip. I've seen stuff with the noradrenaline and dopamine effects of like a morning cold shower, where in that study, the water was like 57 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that. So it wasn't even that cold. So then I was thinking, okay, perhaps all cold exposure doesn't need to be that cold to get the effects. But now you're saying that some other effects are actually even better if you do go, in fact, colder. And I guess with tolerance, you develop a tolerance to it. And the more you do it, it needs to get colder and colder to have the same effect.
Exactly right. You become cold acclimated. Your vasculature improves, your vasoconstriction improves. So that's to defend yourself against the cold. When the smooth muscle tissue constricts around the blood vessels that carry blood to your extremities, this is called vasoconstriction, and it reduces heat losses. So when you got a good, healthy vascular system, one of the ways your body's response to the cold is to shut down the blood circulation to the areas that are exposed to the cold. Then there's the thermogenesis, is to generate your own heat. And this is one of the distinctions between cold showers and a cold bath. You can do a lot with cold showers. You can get that autonomic nervous system activation. You can build some neuroprotective hormones. So you can do the neurotransmitters and the hormone. You can get some of that response as well. But when it comes to the vasculature, partial is different than whole body. When you're in the shower and you're letting the shower come on the front of you, or maybe it's on your shoulders and your arms, your body will shift your circulation and move blood to the other parts that aren't under the cold water. This all makes sense. Your heart rate is going to respond differently to the shower than it will be to the whole body. When you go up to your neck in an ice bath, the only place for the blood to go that isn't cold is up in your head. That can be really good. And deep inside your core. This will activate what's called the dive reflex. It'll slow your heart rate down. After you get through that kind of initial 15 to 45 seconds of shock where your heart rate goes up, then the dive reflex kicks in when your whole body and you go all the way down. That never happens in the shower. So I never get to that state of calm in the shower. I hate the cold shower. I mean, they make me angry. And that's because the cold shower is going to give you the adrenaline. It's going to give you some of that hormone response, but it's never going to put you in that state of meditation that the whole body will be, because you're always moving the blood around to different areas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can definitely confirm that from my experience. The shower, there never comes that relaxation point when you're in the shower. It's always intense. But do you think there is a specific, and I was going to ask you about this anyway, the difference, I guess, between the ice bath, the cold presser test, which I saw you mention in one of your posts, which is just putting the hands in, and like a cold shower. So I guess you already pretty much explained that. But I guess, is there any benefit as opposed to going in the entire bath? Like, is there a mechanism or a specific problem that you would solve by only doing a partial exposure? Or do you think no matter what, full body ice bath is better?
Yo, let me stop you real quick. If you don't subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the fucking channel, like the video, comment something you've learned so far, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode of this podcast. That's it. Back to the show.
The problem you solve when you're going partial is that you don't have to pay for a whole ice bath. Like, I mean, when you're just getting started, if I'm in Phoenix and right now the tap water is like 90 degrees Fahrenheit, there's no such thing as a cold shower for me. But when you're just getting started, you want to try something inexpensive. You want to try something easy. You want to see, hey, what is it like when I do this? So you might be on well water, or maybe you're up north and you say, I'll try a cold shower. The problem that you're solving is you don't have to shell out a lot of money or go down to the gas station and get 200 pounds of ice or something. You can just have a little bit of the experience. You can practice your breathing. You can get started. And that is a wonderful, introduction. It's how I started. I was in there, and I'd be like swearing at the top of my lungs and hating every minute of it, because I started in the winter in Phoenix and the tap water was really only 60 degrees. But it gave me enough of an experience to know that there was something happening. Ice therapy, let's say cold therapy, it's been used in sports, and everybody knows this.
Stuff like that.
The pitcher at the end of the game, he's going to put ice on his elbow to try and hold down the inflammation, or a runner is going to ice their knees. People intuitively know about using cold therapy to target areas of their body that they want to treat for inflammation or to speed recovery. So there could definitely be instances where you can use partial body because you have a specific agenda in mind. But when it comes to metabolism and when it comes to psychological resilience and some of the other more serious health issues that are associated with them, then partial is only going to get you so far.
Okay, that makes sense. So pretty much like the full body effects, like the metabolism, like certain things, like I heard seen you mention like Alzheimer's, things like that. The full body is more effective for things like that. But let's say you twist your ankle or you hurt your arm or your elbow sore from something, then the partial obviously makes the most sense for that because it's just targeted to that area.
I'll give you an example. I have a cousin. I have a lot of respect for him. He's older than me. He's been very successful in his career. He's having knee replacement surgery. And, I texted him afterwards. He said, the surgery went great. I'm in bed. I got to rest my knees and I got ice packs on them. Well, my cousin has type 2 diabetes and he manages it with insulin injections. And I'm like, cousin, this is one of the worst things you can do. Just give me, a little bit of time, 10 minutes a week in the ice bath. We're going to improve your insulin sensitivity. We're going to get you on the, route to metabolic health. He goes, I'll cold pack my knees, but I'm not getting in your ice bath. Most people, it seems so radical to submerge themselves up to their neck, even if they're used to ice packing a shoulder or knee or even a bee sting, and they know that that's good for them. They can't get their head around why anybody would, go up above their armpits in an ice bath.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Psychologically, it definitely is a different ballgame. You have to use a different part of your mind to commit to that full body experience. Whereas like icing your knee is like not that intense because the rest of your body's warm. It's not like a full body threat where it's almost
exactly right.
So I guess that makes sense.
Hit it.
Have more psychological effects because it requires more psychological commitment.
Yep.
That's where the benefit comes in. You get what you pay for, right?
That's correct.
Cool. Okay, so on this topic, there's one more thing that I wanted to ask as far as comparing different aspects of cold exposure. And I've heard some varying opinions on this in lots of different contexts. What are your thoughts about drinking cold water versus drinking room temperature water? So for athletes that are running out in the heat, is drinking cold water cooling you down having the same beneficial effect as opposed to submerging yourself in cold water? Or, does it have effects on metabolism that could be potentially negative, et cetera?
There's some good studies on this. So these are ultra endurance athletes or people trying to do strenuous exercise in the heat. And they say drinking cold water is going to help you exercise in the heat. It makes sense. Here, you're cooling from the inside rather than from the outside. The difficult thing about that is your vasoconstriction, that is your whole vasculature,
going to go outside.
It's constructed to defend your body against external cold, not really internal cold. So the studies that I've read are pretty positive on drinking cold water if you're doing a marathon, if you're doing some hot water, hot air exercise. Let's say your kid is playing baseball. It's the summer. It's a doubleheader. It's a long day. Have him drink the cold water. It's fine. He will get some improvement. However, it is not the same. When you're in the ultra endurance sports, a lot of athletes will experience dysregulation in their gut. Everything in their body is working so hard at fueling the running or fueling the sport that there isn't a lot of circulation or energy left for digestion. And when it goes ultra long, they will experience digestive disorders. The drinking the cold water isn't going to help with that. It's going to make it worse. So heaven forbid, I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. Cold water when you're exercising in the heat is way better than heat stroke. And most people don't have an ice bath available to them when in the middle of their marathon. But other people, great study in Korea, the baseball players will freeze a cabbage leaf and put it under their cap, to extract heat out of their scalp while they're out there on the field in the sun. Then they'll come into the dugout, they'll swap it out for a fresh cabbage leaf, and they'll do a little heat extraction to improve their endurance and their performance, especially their mental acuity, while they're in the middle of the game. Well, so there are other things that you can do if they are available to you. And if not, the cold water, generally what I've seen in the studies is it improves performance.
Okay. So basically the only time it wouldn't be good is if you're doing like ultra long, like endurance workouts type stuff, like running a marathon, doing an Ironman or something.
You got it.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yep. How many David Goggins videos have you seen where he's out there running his 100 miles chewing on ice cubes or something? I don't have any experience in this, and it is such an extreme sport what guys like Goggins are doing. They're pushing their bodies well beyond what you or I would consider part of a training regimen. And it's wonderful to see because the extreme athletes, including the guys who have the record for being submerged up to their neck in ice cubes, for an hour and 45 minutes or whatever it gives us some glimpse into what we all want to believe that human beings are capable of. Like we experience something a little vicarious through these record holders, through these extreme athletes. I don't want to have the experience, but I want to feel like because we're both human, that potential somehow exists inside me too,
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like it's the reason why we like the superhero stories and all that.
Exactly. We want to identify vicariously with these heroes without actually having to go through the arduous experience ourselves. I think that's part of why the ice bath videos on Instagram have gotten kind of ridiculous. They're very popular. And when we see people doing it, we get a little nervous system activation ourselves, just empathetically watching it happen. We want to believe that we would be brave enough or that we would have that experience. But really, some part of our brain is like, are they going to be okay? Like, are they going to come out? There's some suspense about it. I think probably the most boring Joe Rogan video he ever did was 20 minutes in the ice bath. And it's just him going, and I don't think he even would have done it if Jocko Willink hadn't called him up and said, Joe, you're being a wimp. You only did 2 minutes yesterday. And, you got to get in there. But the only reason to watch that is because some part of our mind is not sure he's ever going to make it out. It's kind of like the high wire guy. We don't want to see anybody walk on a rope that's only 2 feet off the ground because it's not exciting. And we're not hoping that anybody falls. But if you walk across a rope, over Niagara Falls, then we're riveted because something really bad might happen. And our psychology doesn't want to miss it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So now that we've talked about the differences between different aspects of cold exposure on different parts of the body versus whole body versus drinking it, etc., I want to move on to some hormone related stuff. So the first one I want to talk about is cortisol. So I've seen you discuss a couple different things as far as cortisol goes. So as the full body stuff is concerned, cortisol actually tends to go down. Do I have that correct? like after you get out of the ice bath? Or is that
cortisol is confusing. There are some studies that say the ice bath will increase cortisol. There are some studies that say the ice bath will take cortisol down. And making sense of these studies, you're like, hey, is it going up or down? Well, the ice bath seems to modulate cortisol. There is no definitive study that demonstrates this. Nobody's looked at their own data with this particular question in mind. Most people are saying, hey, we're going to take blood samples. We might as well measure cortisol as well. And that's why the studies are conflicting. What I've seen is that people who start too high, they come down when they get in the ice bath. People who are chronically low will come up when in the ice bath. So that's what I mean by modulate. It will normalize your cortisol levels. And that can be really important. Everybody thinks that cortisol is the stress hormone. And it's true. When you put your body under stress, typically you're going to expect a cortisol release. But there is something about people who suffer from PTSD. Despite the fact that they're constantly under stress, their cortisol levels are chronically low. And intuitively, this is a surprise. It's not what we would expect. But in studies of treating PTSD, when they administer exogenous cortisol prior to a therapy session, so it could be just conventional talk therapy, but they say, hey, this guy, his cortisol is chronically low. We're going to give him a little shot of cortisol, and then we're going to do the regular therapy. The therapy becomes more effective. There's a reason that a stress response brings on a cortisol response. It's to prepare our body to get through the stressful period and resolve it. When we're chronically low on cortisol, we are not hormonally prepared. So the question is, if we got people in the ice bath before they did their talk therapy or whatever their therapeutic regimen is going to be, and their own body endogenously corrected their cortisol levels, would that make the therapy more effective? Just like in these studies where they got a shot? Nobody has asked this question, and nobody has carved out a population of PTSD patients to ask the question just of them. Would the ice bath accelerate their therapeutic recovery? But I was on the phone the other day with a guy in Australia. He's former special forces in Australia. He's now out of the armed services. And he's like a lot of guys, he's having trouble adjusting. He was using alcohol to manage his anxieties, to numb his feelings, and to sort of skate over his PTSD without actually addressing it. He reached a point where he's like, this isn't working for me. I got kids, I got a wife, I got to stop drinking. He started using ice baths every morning. He hasn't touched a drop in a month. And there's a combination of freeing his body from the alcohol so his brain can heal, but using the discipline and his training from the military to put himself in this uncomfortable ice bath situation to manage his anxieties in a different way that has upped his functioning. I've asked him to stay in touch because I don't know what's going to happen next. Right now, he's dry. His brain is healing. He's getting through the situations that otherwise would make him anxious by structuring his day better. And he says if it gets to be around 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning there, and he hasn't had his ice bath yet, he's like, he starts to miss it. He starts to crave it. Like he knows he's got to get in there and he's got to get that natural hit of all the neurotransmitters and hormones that the ice bath is going to stimulate expression of.
Wow. I think I saw your post about that guy with the alcohol.
Yeah. Well, I've connected with him and I finally got a chance to interview him so I can write about him in the book.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to talk about your book towards the end. So I'll keep that in mind. So, okay, so we talked about cortisol. That's really interesting that it modulates it and kind of brings it to balance as opposed to doing either like raising it or lowering it just across the board. That's pretty profound, I would say. That's interesting.
I think you're on the right track, Nick. If we can do that reliably, like right now I'm grabbing studies and I'm like, oh, look at this. The high group came down, the low group came up. But if we could do it reliably, if we could use the ice bath in a prescriptive way to help people manage their cortisol, I think we could show biochemically why people say the ice bath is so good for their stress. Like people tell stories all the time, and this is great. If they're having a good experience, I don't want to keep that from them, but it doesn't explain the mechanisms by which something could work. So there's a lot more science to be done there, and it could be profound.
Yeah, and I would even potentially raise the idea that for the high group where cortisol comes lower and modulates down back to baseline down, I mean, that could have pretty decent effects on insulin sensitivity, no? So that could be a mechanism for improved insulin sensitivity just through cortisol alone.
I hadn't thought about that because the effects on brown fat and insulin sensitivity are so profound. But I think you're on the right track.
Because I know that cortisol down or up regulates myostatin, which also contributes to insulin resistance. So cortisol through myostatin could also, lowering cortisol, down regulating myostatin could also increase insulin sensitivity as well.
These are outstanding observations.
As an idea.
What up, guys? I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I just wanted to take a little break here quick and tell you a little bit about the Breath Bosses community on School, where I teach about all different topics and all of the foundational pillars of health and vitality and energy access. So we go over things like nutrition, we go over breath optimization, we go over hormone optimization and different hormonal pathways, we go over sleep optimization, we go over circadian rhythm regulation, we go over non-toxic living and avoiding poison and things like that. We go over muscle building and hypertrophy science. We go over lots of different things, all of the most foundational things that are necessary for you to perform at your highest level and ball the fuck out in every aspect of life. Plus, I teach live breathwork classes every single week to members, and every other week I hold office hour sessions where you can come. I'm on Zoom for 3 hours, and you can come in and ask me questions about anything pertaining to health. And the purpose of this community is so members can interact with each other and so that you guys can have all of the information that's absolutely necessary so you can absolutely ball the fuck out in every aspect of your life. So if you're interested in becoming a breath boss, click the link in the description below and we'll get you started today.
Yeah. The body is a system. You can't change just one thing. Take my cousin who's, injecting himself with insulin. He's doing that because he knows his blood sugars are too high. His body's become insulin resistant. He's type 2 diabetic. His doctor says, look, chronically high blood sugars are dangerous. They're going to eventually rupture your capillaries and they're going to do bad things for your circulation. So we got to try and get those under control. Insulin will reduce your blood sugar. But nobody talks about the other systemic effects that happen in the body of giving yourself too much insulin. That is, pharmacy companies want you to believe that you can take one thing for one symptom and then be done with it. Then they have a long list of side effects. Before you know it, you're on like another pill to manage the side effects from the first pill. And side effects are bullshit. There's no such thing as side effects. There are only effects because you can never change just one thing in the body. The rest of your body will begin to compensate around the one thing that you're trying to change, and it will become changed too. And sometimes in unpredictable ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess my perspective on hormones in general is that exogenously taking any hormone for extended period of time will have undesirable effects because hormones don't just do one thing. Insulin doesn't just do one thing. It doesn't only regulate your blood sugar. It does a lot of things.
Right.
So I'm big on this. My main thing that I promote is optimizing testosterone naturally through lifestyle intervention so that you don't have to get on TRT to feel good. So it's the same kind of concept where exogenously taking testosterone for a long period of time has, different side effects on fertility or we could talk about that all day. But I mean, this is, I guess, the same thing when it comes to type 2 diabetes and taking insulin for long periods of time. Now, one thing I wanted to also ask you about, which is kind of personal to me as well. I've seen you talk about your son and type 1 diabetes. So I'll give you a little context for why I'm asking about this. My father was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 53 a couple years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
Super rare. They told him that it was COVID and then his body was fighting COVID. And then, now he has type 1 diabetes. And they said it's basically an anomaly. They have no explanation. I think that's just an explanation for it. Like they don't know what caused it. And they said,
right. Show me that study. It was COVID.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what it was. The fact is his pancreas is no longer making insulin. Okay, yeah. Let's deal with that. Yep.
So something he learned about was, they were telling him or somebody was telling him, he was learning somewhere about the consequences of long-term taking insulin. And he was originally trying to figure out what do I have to do to not take insulin? What do I have to do to not take insulin? How can I figure out how to get around having to take this insulin? Because it's going to take years off my life if I end up taking it for an extended period of time. So how do I figure it out? And we haven't figured it out. So he's still on insulin for now. So I think this cold exposure thing is an interesting thing. It's only been about 2 years. So I feel like if there is a window to kind of fix the problem before it gets unfixable, we're still potentially within that window. So I like to ask everybody who I interview who may have any insight on type 1 diabetes, what their take on it is, or if they have any recommendations. So he's not a cold exposure guy. Doesn't have any experience with it.
My son was 6 when he was diagnosed. It used to be called juvenile diabetes because typically the type 1 does appear in childhood, not as late in adulthood as with your dad. And it is an autoimmune disorder in which the immune system attacks the islet cells in the pancreas that manufacture insulin and secrete it into the bloodstream. So it is not
it's not
so sorry, go ahead.
It's different from insulin resistance. It's not type 2.
Absolutely.
It's that the actual
and it's
production
not impossible.
Impeded.
Like my son had a viral infection. It's just like a winter cold, and then it turned into this episode of type 1 diabetes. That is because it's an autoimmune disorder. It's not impossible that it's activated by some immune response, whether it's COVID or some other virus or something. My son must have been teetering on the edge of diagnosis. And then whether it was the flu or a cold or whatever, just sort of put him over the edge. And that's when we really noticed it. Because the body requires insulin. My son, your dad, they will never be free of the necessity of insulin injections. But there's also something called double diabetes. And that's when you're type 1 diabetic, you don't make any insulin, and you're type 2 diabetic. You're eating so many carbs and you're using so much insulin that your mitochondria are becoming damaged, and the cells defend themselves against the additional glucose by creating insulin resistance. Double diabetes is the worst because it's so difficult now to manage your blood sugars, manage your insulin demand, because you believe some dietitian that told you you can have all the carbs you want as long as you inject for it. There are some new studies that show a low-carb diet is beneficial for type 1 diabetics. But almost every endocrinologist I've ever had contact with cautions against going keto for type 1 diabetes, because you have to monitor yourself so close when you're type 1 diabetic in keto that you don't trip over into ketoacidosis, which can be very dangerous. It was the condition that my son was in when we admitted him to the pediatric ICU. Now, for the rest of his life, they were telling me if he ever has a fever, you got to bring him back to the hospital. My son doesn't want to go to the hospital. He's never been back to the hospital for diabetes since his diagnosis. And because it's a very impressionable age, 6, it was a traumatic experience, and he doesn't want to go back again. So when he had a fever, he would beg me, like, just ignore the doctor's advice. Don't take me back to the hospital. And I would be checking his blood sugar and his ketones on a constant basis to try and manage his insulin. Now, if it ever got out of control, of course we would go to the hospital. But we got him through several fevers without, just moderate ketones, without runaway ketoacidosis. The experience of type 1 diabetics has given the keto diet and ketogenesis a bad name. Because it can be a serious condition for type 1 diabetics, people say, well, it's dangerous for everybody. No, it's not. Keto, not for your dad, but for you and I, going in and out of keto is a very natural state. We are making the insulin we need. We will even make the glucose we need. Our liver is capable of gluconeogenesis, synthesizing the new. If we're on a zero carb diet, it's okay. Our liver will take care of it. Put a little bit of glucose, a little bit of insulin coming from our pancreas into us. We will stay in a homeostatic balance. But your dad and my son won't. They need the data from their bloodstream to monitor and prescribe the right amount of insulin. And generally, you're on the right track. Less insulin demand typically indicates a healthier metabolism in a type 1 diabetic.
Yeah, that's been basically the main focus of what we've been implementing with him. Just anything that increases insulin sensitivity. We've just been like trying to get him to still be able to eat enough carbs so that his SHBG could be lower. Because we notice when he eats like basically no carbs and he's barely shooting any insulin, his SHBG is like 70, 80 plus, and his free testosterone.
Wow.
So from not taking enough insulin and not eating enough carbs, his SHBG goes super high. So we've been trying to find that sweet spot of how much carbs, how much insulin, and making sure that for the amount of carbs, we can minimize the amount of insulin. And that's been pretty well. One of the biggest things that's worked for him the best with increasing insulin sensitivity has been magnesium. So like when he started taking magnesium bicarbonate, and as soon as he started taking that a day, I put him on like a macro dose, like 600, 700 milligrams a day, split throughout the day, liquid magnesium bicarbonate from Pristine Hydro. And he started shooting like significantly less units of insulin, like 5-6 units less a day right off the bat, first day.
That makes a ton of sense because mitochondria need magnesium. It catalyzes something like 300 different metabolic reactions. You can't quote me on the number, but you're getting the right impression.
It is 300 something. I know that.
It is? Okay, right.
Yeah.
If your mitochondria don't have the magnesium that they need, they won't work right. So Jack Cruz, who's very difficult for me to understand, Dr. Jack, he's adamant and he's direct and he's forceful, but frankly, I'm not an MD and a lot of it goes over my head. But he's got this one phrase that makes sense to me. If your body can make it, you don't need to take it. So it applies great for testosterone. You and I are making our own testosterone. Why would we need to take it? Well, in the absence of some extreme disorder or dysfunction or castration or something like this, then we want to create the right conditions for our body to make our own testosterone. But your body can't make magnesium. You've got to get it in your diet.
Exactly.
And the crappy thing about that is all of the green leafy vegetables that are supposed to be rich in minerals, they're all coming out of Central California where the soils are depleted. They don't have anywhere near the mineral content that they used to. I don't eat a lot of vegetables myself, although I like them for flavor. If you're not getting enough magnesium in your diet, then you got to supplement because your body will crave it. It sounds like your dad wasn't getting what he needed from his diet, and magnesium bicarbonate, it doesn't sound like a megadose. I mean, it's going to let you know when you're taking too much oral magnesium.
In comparison, it was a megadose. If I take 600 milligrams, I'm going to shit my brains out. For him,
exactly.
He's like, fine, we've been pushing the envelope. Be like, all right, take 100 more tomorrow. Take 100 more tomorrow. See where that threshold is until you shit yourself once. And then
and then back off. Right.
And then back off and go back and find the sweet spot. So that's pretty much what we've been doing for the last year or so, and it's made a huge difference for him. I also wanted to discuss with you for cold thermogenesis or for cold exposure in general. I saw a post that you made about the importance of making sure you have adequate magnesium when you're doing a lot of cold exposure because you have like an upper need for it. And it's the same with athletes from what I've seen. As an athlete, if you're lifting heavy, if you're doing any kind of intense exercise consistently, you have a higher threshold, you have a higher need for magnesium as opposed to someone who's more sedentary. So, I mean, my dad is also kind of a psycho when it comes to sports as well. He's a nationally competitive tennis player still at like 50 something. And he's actually almost about to go to nationals again this year, but he does more cardio than me. He's more active than me. And I lift 5-6 days a week and he's more active than me.
Yeah.
So he already, I feel like, had a very high requirement for magnesium. And then in addition to the diabetes diagnosis, I feel like he was just super magnesium deficient compared to what he actually needed. And he's not a big milk drinker either. From what I see on my chronometer, magnesium, the milk and I do dark chocolate sometimes. Those are pretty much the two major sources of magnesium that I get from food. And even though I still do, between like 300-400 milligrams per day, I still supplement on top of that. And I've noticed a significant difference in my sleep quality and my performance just from doing magnesium. And I'm not a huge supplement guy. I've been big against supplements for a really long time. And I'm very particular about the ones that I recommend. Magnesium is one of them. Another one would be like creatine monohydrate. I'm cool with, depending on where you live, boron, in the winter, I'll do boron. In the summer, I don't do it because there's fruit everywhere, but yeah, only certain ones and mostly just minerals. I'm not big on vitamins either, like retinol supplements. I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. So what are your thoughts on that? Are, minerals mainly the only ones or amino acids that you would recommend for supplements overall? We don't have to get super in detail.
No.
Out of curiosity.
your audience is different than the people in my world. Like, your audience is probably really in tune with their diet and their exercise and are thinking about optimizing their health. But, I teach at a university, and I'm surrounded by guys my age who are on prescription meds, who are all dysregulated metabolically, who don't get enough sunshine. Like, most of America is in a chronic state of disease.
100%.
If you, for example, Arizona, you think, oh, it's the sunshine state, Valley of the Sun, but nobody goes outside in the summer because it's so dang hot. They just go from their air conditioned office to their, parking lot, to their air conditioned car where they park in their garage. They might never actually get sun exposure. And if I meet one of those people, there's nothing wrong with a vitamin D supplement to correct a condition that is so far out of whack. They're not eating fish. They're not getting vitamin D in their diet. And there's this surprising deficiency. I'm like, yeah, the supplements, when you think about them as medicine, when you have a specific disorder or a specific disease, and it is something like a vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency, I want to get that fixed, and I want to get it fixed right away. Now you can talk with somebody about they call them lifestyle changes, and that's fine. But most people are never going to make them. Mm-hmm. It is okay with me to correct some of these extraordinary, I'm going to call them, I want to call them aberrations, but the fact is they're pretty normal conditions. And if taking some vitamin D and K2 is going to keep your bones healthy, then
K2 is a big important one too. How do you feel about cod liver oil as opposed to vitamin D? I've seen a lot of, I'm glad you mentioned vitamin D. I think it's a very interesting one, and it's a very nuanced topic. I think it's also interesting that when you supplement vitamin D, it's actually the precursor to the hormone vitamin D. So it's a little different than injecting a hormone. You still have to convert it anyway. So I think that makes it a little better. But I've also seen some things about how supplementing like synthetic D3 also like offsets liver retinol and your ability to store vitamin A in your liver and some other things. So I tread carefully when I recommend vitamin D. I normally recommend cod liver oil because it also still comes with a fuckload of retinol. So that I
love it.
And it's a more natural source. But I do agree. And honestly, you'd be surprised. A lot of people in my world as well, still are shocked by some of the basic lifestyle interventions that I promote. I have to put an entire course about sunlight exposure in my program. So we dedicate an entire day of my 9-day program just about circadian rhythm regulation and sunlight exposure. I'm a big advocate for being in the sun as much as possible. Even if you're under an umbrella, just go the fuck outside, let your eyes get the sun in. Even if you're going to wear clothes so you don't get burnt, being outside is huge. And I mean, grounding is another one that's huge too. I mean, sunlight isn't as good if you're not touching the earth. So that's actually another point we can bring up and pull it back into cold exposure real quick. I've seen your post about the importance of grounding in in water as opposed to just sticking your feet on the ground. The statistic that I saw that you wrote was grounding in water is 20 times more effective than walking barefoot in the grass. And that was according to somebody else. I forget who you tagged. Ben
Greenfield taught me that.
Ben Greenfield. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of intuitively thought that when it comes to ocean swimming. So I've always been a surfer my whole life. I'm a big ocean guy. Big beach guy. For the last few years, I've lived on different islands, and I lived in Hawaii for a little bit. I've been huge on going in the ocean, and I felt like that was one of the most fundamental, foundational lifestyle pillars for being healthy, was being near the ocean or being in the ocean or eating something that comes from the ocean, something along those lines. Even in the winter, I make an effort. Even just being and breathing the ocean air has, in my opinion, different effects on your body, noticeably that I've felt, at least from being near the ocean versus not being near the ocean. So I think it's super interesting, the concept, because I always thought about it like full body grounding. I'm like, the ocean is basically like the ground. So you are, light is going into the ocean, and there's all the fish are living in there and breathing in there, and there's a lot of electricity going on. So there has to be, it's basically like grounding with your whole body because it's touching the entire surface of your body. So I wonder where the 20 times, if it's like a more specific number or if that's just a generalization, but it kind of makes sense that it would be like 20 times or even more effective than just touching the ground. Because if you think about like the electrical conductivity, realistically, the pieces of the grass that are wet, that are touching your foot, that's really the only, I guess, area where it's really coming through to your feet. So if it's like, if it just rained last night and you're walking in the grass barefoot, it's a little more efficient than if it's 90 degrees out and you're going through a heat wave and the ground is dry as can be and all the grass is dead. It's not the same. So I guess, is there anything else that you want to add to what I just said, or any details that you feel like the audience may not know as far as the differences between grounding in water versus grounding normal, or any other?
People don't talk about grounding anywhere near enough. So I'm going to get mechanistic, and then I'm going to talk about metaphor. When your body builds up static charge, everybody has this experience. It's dry, it's in the winter, you walk on the rug and you reach for the door handle and you get a little shock. Or maybe you were a kid and you had, rub I don't know if you ever did this, but I did, the balloon on your head, and then your hair goes up. Like, somehow we know that we are electric beings. We're like little capacitors running around on this earth. But then we never really think about what that means for our health. We know we store electric charge, but we don't say, why am I getting shocked? Maybe I'm not supposed to be on a synthetic carpet all day building up this big static charge. What happens in your blood when you have that static charge is each red blood cell carries a charge as well. There's something called zeta potential. I first learned about it in grad school for environmental engineering, and it is a measure of the charge around particles in the water. So in water treatment, you want to control the zeta potential of each little particle so you can get them to aggregate and precipitate out of the water, and that's how you treat the water. So you add, in most water treatment plants, it's called aluminum sulfate or alum, to control that electric cloud that is part of the charge around the particle. The same thing happens in our bloodstream. Each red blood cell has its own electric cloud that is controlled by the zeta potential. But we don't want our red blood cells to aggregate. When we build up the static electric charge, it changes that zeta potential in ways that promotes aggregation of the red blood cells and leads to blood clots. Blood clots could be deep vein thrombosis. It could be heart attack. It could be a stroke. Blood clots are a bad thing inside your body. They're a good thing on a laceration, or a wound, but they kill people inside the body. So when you build up static charge, you make yourself more prone to blood clots. Now, for a kid, not a big deal. You know that clotting is so rare, with some horrible exceptions as vaccine side reactions. Clotting is so rare among kids, not a big deal. But at my age, clotting becomes a serious risk. So I'm getting my grounding, and that's improving my circulation. It's reducing the tendency of my red blood cells to form clots inside my body. That's the mechanism. But now let's talk about the metaphor. We all know what it means to be grounded, like psychologically grounded,
not up in the clouds,
feet on the ground. Yeah, exactly. Instead of having your hair flying out all over the place, in some kind of peripatetic state of panic, we feel grounded. And that's the other thing that grounding does for us: calm our nervous system. We operate. Not everything in our body operates this way, but that electrical impulses travel through our nervous system to control the action of our cells. When we build up all this static charge, we have interfered with the natural communication process. This is sort of electro mechanism of control inside our body. Not the only mechanism of control, but it's a fast and a dominant one. We ground ourselves, we discharge that static electricity, and it's no wonder that we feel more grounded. Now, how does it happen? Walking around in the grass is great. Sleeping on the ground is great. But going in the ocean is the number one best way to ground yourself. It's practically instantaneous. Second best, go into the stream, the river, the lake, the fresh water. Also very rapid. Third best,
wherever the water's moving. So like a waterfall or something where waves are crashing,
wonderful. Yep.
The ions get released.
Exactly right. Yep. You get this constant stream of conductive material. Yep. Third best is you go into the Morozko ice bath, because as far as I know, it's the only ice bath that has been third-party verified for its grounding. Brian Hoyer of Shielded Healing, he measured Ben Greenfield's ice bath, he measured Luke Story's ice bath, and he's like, we've got fantastic grounding effects going on here. And this is why Ben says 20 times more effective than walking around on the grass in your bare feet, because Brian Hoyer has measured it for him. To get grounding from your ice bath, you can't be in one of these inflatable rubber, they're wicked cheap,
yeah.
which is great, but they're not grounded. You have to have a metal tub, and the metal tub has to be electrically connected to the earth. So at Morosco, we've done that. The copper coils are in contact with the tub, which are in contact with the compressor, which are in contact. They go straight into the ground in your house.
It's awesome.
If your ice bath isn't made of metal and is not specifically designed to ground, you're not getting that extra grounding benefit. I also have sheets with silver threads in them. So at night, I get a little grounding that way. You can buy a grounding pad. Those are all slower and less effective than getting into a grounded bath. You're not going to get it from your shower. You're not going to get it from your, fiberglass or acrylic bathtub in your bathroom. It just means you have to get it other ways.
Makes a lot of sense. What do you think about an outdoor shower, like at a beach house, where you're standing on the ground in the sand and the water's just coming
Wonderful.
over? Still pretty solid.
Yeah, of course you're getting grounded. By the
You're
time
grounded
you
anyway,
reach the outdoor shower,
yeah.
right, you don't even need grounding. You've been at the beach all day.
Yeah.
You're probably washing the sand off your toe. Right. Yeah.
That's a good point. Good point. Okay, so the mechanism that you explained for the grounding is interesting. I've actually heard another mechanism that I want to get your opinion on. Are you familiar with Dr. Thomas Cowan?
I don't think I am.
Okay, so you might find this really interesting then. So he has a perspective on heart disease and high blood pressure that has to do with electricity. So he describes the fueling of the blood flow as the heart is not a pump, and what fuels the blood flow from the capillaries, like in your feet back up to your heart, is the separation of charges, right? So when you're exposed to an electromagnetic field from nature, whether it's the ground, whether it's the sunlight, whether it's a hug from another person, petting an animal, whatever it is, you are basically fueling that separation of charges where the proteins that line the blood vessels are hydrophilic surfaces. So you form that fourth phase of water, that gel phase along the border of your blood vessels, which is all electronegative. And then the positive ions are in the middle of the blood vessel and they repel each other. And that is what fuels the blood flow through the body. So his perspective is basically that these things fuel that separation of charges. So whether that is free flowing electrons from the ground, from the ocean, from the sunlight, from human interaction or interaction with animals, touching a tree, whatever, all kind of, I guess you could say, are grounding. All of these things fuel that blood flow. And then when that is compromised from something like EMF exposure, or, being cut off from grounding, being inside all day, being in front of this camera with the blue light all over me and sitting next to my computer with my phone in my pocket, all these things, I've considered that this is my opinion, that like everything in life is kind of like a song. So it's all music playing. The ground is playing a song. The sun is playing a song, but also my phone is playing a song and the computer is playing a song. And your body has to hear the natural songs for the effects to take place. If your phone and your computer and the lights are louder, then your body can't really hear it. So I guess it's kind of like one is stronger than the other because you're exposed to more of it. And if that's the case for you over a long period of time, that separation of charges is then compromised. The blood flow, the fuel of the flow is compromised. And then the body has to compensate by either vasoconstriction or whatever other methods that the body goes through to make the blood flow continue. Because according to his perspective, the blood flow into the heart is what keeps the heart going. So because it's what's the word he used? Hydraulic ram. So the blood flow in has to create the pressure that creates the vacuums that opens the valves that allows the spiraling of the blood to happen, and then going out of the heart through the aortic arch, which compresses when the blood goes out of the heart instead of straightening out like you would think a hose would. So that pressure is necessary, and that compromising of the blood flow will compromise the heart's ability to beat or to funnel through or open up and allow the blood to come through. So that's the mechanism that I heard for why grounding in sunlight and nature is super important, because of that free electron flow, that negative ion flow that allows that separation of charges in the blood to take place. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So what do you think?
I agree. It's a way better explanation than what I learned as a kid. When I grew up in the 70s, there were only like 3 channels, like we didn't have 500 cable TV and YouTube. So all the kids were watching the same thing. And every kid's favorite day was Saturday morning cartoons. I don't know even that's a thing anymore, but, I'd wake up for Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner, Scooby-Doo, all this stuff. And there was a rule back then that they had to have public service programming. A series of music videos came out for Saturday morning cartoons. They're supposed to be educational, called Schoolhouse Rock. Have you ever seen these?
I've heard of them. It rings a bell.
Okay, it's more my generation. They're really catchy, like conjunction, junction, what's what, right? Okay, it's supposed to teach us grammar, right? The Schoolhouse Rock videos on anatomy and biology are terrible. Like, they're really stupid. They teach all the wrong things. The ones on nutrition are awful. There's a song that goes, I'm a machine, you're a machine. And it's trying to teach us about metabolism. And it makes the analogy to a car that gets filled up with gas. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't know any better. But now that I think back, I'm like, what a bunch of lies. I am not a car, and I am not a machine. And if you think of food like gasoline instead of nutrition, instead of information, then you're going to wind up fat and sick. The most important thing about the food we eat is what it teaches our body about our environment. The second most important thing are all the micronutrients in there. And then there's like 50 feet of crap. And way down at the bottom, like, least important thing is calorie content, right? So
I love that you put that as first. I love that you put the
most people, right? Yep. And that's coming from that Schoolhouse Rock mentality that makes you think gasoline is not information for your engine. It's just chemical energy. The point here is Schoolhouse Rock was emblematic of this calories in, calories out hypothesis, of all the wrong things that the propaganda they were trying to teach us about food to keep us sick and to sell us a bunch of cheap carbs. Why did it work? Because we understand machines a lot better than we understand the complex processes of the human body.
The machines are
more guarantee simple. Sorry, go ahead.
Machines are more simple. Easier to understand.
You got it.
More
a kid can understand a machine. And so you come at a kid on Saturday morning cartoon, he's like, what is this? Get back to Scooby-Doo, or, whatever. And when you say, oh, digestion is just like a simpler thing over here that you can actually understand. We're trying to teach how the body works by making analogies to simpler things that people can actually comprehend. And it is doing a disservice. So when you say the heart is not a pump, he's trying to break this oversimplification machine analogy that does us no good. Now, if I'm going to get all engineering and technical on him, I can say, well, this heart has several characteristics that are similar to a pump, or some bullcrap like defense. But I would rather just say, stop thinking of the heart like it's a pump, because your body is not a pipeline. Your body is not a machine.
The point he's trying to make.
Exactly.
Trying to break the mental thinking.
Yep. And I think people are going to they might protest because they have been told from a very early age, oh, your brain is just like a computer. Well, what the heck? Back in 1900, before there was such thing as, did they say, oh, your brain's like an abacus? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Your brain is not a computer. We are not machines. And all of those analogies are poor crutches to try and comprehend the way our bodies and our complex systems really work. We got to stop using them.
Makes total sense to me. We're on the same page. All right. Wow, this has been a great conversation. I didn't even know we were going to take it. I'm happy about that. So, okay. So next, going to rope it back in, get back onto the cold exposure wave. Actually, no, we don't have to talk about it. It's fine. If anything, if there's time at the end. So next, I want to go over another term that I hear thrown out in the cold exposure world that I feel like the average person who is consuming content about cold exposure doesn't fully understand, and that you may be able to clarify for them. What are cold shock proteins?
So this is an area that is on the periphery of my expertise. I didn't even talk about cold shock proteins until a new study came out, and it was about Peto's paradox. So here's the dominant theory of cancer. Cancer is an aberrant mutation in the nucleus of your cells, which contains your DNA, and your DNA, they don't fully replicate correctly, mutation, and then some of them become cancerous. And if that were the case, then you would expect organisms with more cells that live longer would have more mutations and become more cancerous the longer they live. This is the dominant theory. The problem with the dominant theory is that it doesn't explain whales. The bowhead whale lives 200 years. It's huge. Why doesn't it die of cancer at the same, at the age of 70 or something? Like at a comparable age, is the rate of mutation lower? Not really. And so this study came out of University of Rochester, and they said the DNA mutations happen, but they sometimes get repaired. Your body has mechanisms to repair the DNA before it proliferates. One of those mechanisms is called cold shock proteins. And so they started taking apart whale cells and seeing whether the cold shock proteins were the mechanism of DNA repair. Peto's paradox, which isn't a paradox at all, but it says, how could whales or elephants or these huge long-lived creatures live so long without developing cancer at the same rates that human beings and other species do? And the resolution of it is...
If you're getting value out of this episode, don't be selfish. Copy and paste the link and send it to somebody who you think would also get value from this. That's it. Back to the show.
They have these DNA repair mechanisms. So I'm going to try and encapsulate this. There are heat shock proteins, there are cold shock proteins. Some of the proteins are the same, but you put your body in a physiological, stressful environment, and your body will respond to attempt to maintain homeostasis, to keep the conditions inside your body the same, no matter what the conditions outside are. One of the responses is the production of proteins. The principal job of DNA is to code up new proteins. So great. Thermoreceptors sense that you are cold or hot, and they activate the nervous system. They signal the brown fat in your body to start producing heat, and they signal other cells in your body to start producing other defense mechanisms. Cold shock proteins, of which there are an array, are part of those. But this study out of University of Rochester said there's a particular cold shock protein that repairs broken DNA. And that may explain why bowhead whales don't get cancer, despite the fact that they're so enormous and live 200 years. The overall principle is more important than the mechanisms. There's a guy, Hans Selye, S-E-L-Y-E, and I might be mispronouncing his last name. He's born in Vienna, Austria, like 1905 or something. He comes over to North America. He spent his whole career at McGill. He's both a medical doctor and a PhD. And he practically invented our modern concept of the term stress. He noticed there are all these different diseases, and you can induce them in laboratory rats. And some of the characteristics of these diseases are common no matter what the disease is. Inflammation. He goes, well, hang on a second. If inflammation is characteristic of infection, and inflammation is characteristic of injury, and inflammation is characteristic of cold stress, then what the heck is inflammation? Like, we can't use it to diagnose any particular disorder because it is present in all of them. He goes, I'm going to call this generalized systemic physiological response stress. And all of us now use this word stress in that way. Well, in the early 70s, at the end of his career, he wrote a book called Stress Without Distress. And it introduced the idea that stress could be good for you, that this is your body's natural response to the stress condition. He redefined stress as not something negative, but anything that puts a demand on the resources of your body. Now, for me, it's too general, but he's talking about this generalized physiological response to our external stimulus. He says you have a choice in how you respond to it, which is very Viktor Frankl of him. Viktor Frankl, also born in Vienna, he survived the Nazi death camps. He moved to the United States, and he's most famous for saying, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is where our free will exists. Scott Carney wrote a book called The Wedge, and he was referring to Viktor Frankl's space where we choose our response. Hans Seeley pointed out that sometimes the response we choose to the stimulus is more dangerous than like the physiological, the inflammation, the stress itself. So I think this is a very provocative idea because I work in resilient infrastructure. There's a disaster. There are choices that infrastructure managers and first responders make that can either make the disaster worse or make it better. It is how they handle, how are they trained to handle the stress? How are they trained to be surprised? What are the adaptive choices that they make in response that either make it a near miss or cascade into a catastrophe? So in civil engineering, I have this professional interest, but recently I've been writing a lot on PTSD and on stress and how our body responds. Many of the stresses that we've been told are dangerous for us are good for us. It is our attitude about those stresses that we get to choose, which dictates whether we benefit, called eustress, or whether we're harmed, called distress. The cold shock proteins are your body's response. They're going to happen in response to these external stimuli. The meaning that you make about the experience of your stress is probably more important than the body's physiological, probably more important than the mechanisms of cold shock or heat shock or whatever it is, and everything that's happening inside your body. You don't actually need to know how a sauna can improve your vasculature and improve your endothelial function for you to benefit from the sauna. But it's helpful, I find, to visualize these things that are happening inside my body for me to make a meaning of the experience. So when I get into the cold bath and I say, okay, this is what's happening with my vasoconstriction, this is happening with my heart rate, my body right now is expressing dopamine and norepinephrine, and my oxytocin and vasopressin are becoming elevated. It helps me construct a story of why I'm there in the first place. And that is way better than, the story that my toes are trying to tell me, which is, get us out of here. You're going to kill us, This is what cold feels like, toes. You hang in there. Everybody else is like doing their job. We're all working on something here. You got to remodel that microvasculature so that you can tolerate this. It's only a couple minutes. We're going to get you out in plenty of time. I have this whole fairy tale that goes on in my meditation, talking to different parts of my body about the meaning of the experience that I'm having. This is why I like Huberman's approach. Deliberate cold exposure. We're doing this on purpose because we want to create a eustress environment. We want the hormetic benefit of choosing the stress rather than having it thrust upon us in a context that we can't control.
Yeah, that makes sense. The what got me into cold exposure in the first place with taking cold showers was someone first told me, oh, if you take a cold shower in the morning, when you go out in the cold in the winter, you're less cold. And I was like, oh,
it's
right,
true.
I'll give that a go. So I would freeze myself before school in the morning and put a cold shower on. This was like in high school before I even knew about any of like health benefits from it or whatever. I would just take a freezing cold shower. I'm in New Jersey. So in the winter, it gets freaking cold. And in high school, I had to take a really long train ride to school. I went to private school and it was like a very long, cold, freezing, miserable commute. And the cold showers actually pretty significantly made me more adapted to the cold and made my walk to and from the train significantly better. And then after high school, I kind of just stopped doing it, kind of forgot about it. It kind of like came back into scope. But yeah, I do also like, I was going to say even in the beginning when you told me everybody's kind of terms that they use for it, cold thermogenesis versus deliberate cold exposure. I feel like there was one other one, but I forget. But I did like the deliberate cold exposure because that's the only one that really mentions or distinguishes from choosing to go into the cold and that making the difference. It's a mental thing. I really like the story, like talking to your toes and kind of having that conversation with yourself to kind of occupy your mind. It is kind of like a meditation, like talking to yourself or talking to your toes. I've never thought about it like that, but I really like that. Now, I've also seen another, what was it? My Spanish teacher, like freshman or sophomore year of college, showed me a TED Talk by Kelly McGonigal, and it was about your vision of stress determining whether or not stress is good or bad for you. She displayed a study where they took people and surveyed them by whether they think stress is good or bad for them and how much stress they get, and then they compared the data with like how long it took them all to die over like a 50, 60-year period. And it showed that the people who saw stress as something that was helpful or that something that wasn't bad lived longer, which I thought was pretty nuts. And at the time, it was pretty helpful to me because I was a college kid who was stressed as they get. And, it was interesting for me to kind of flip that switch and change my mind about stress and see it as a positive thing. And now, as I've dove into testosterone research and things like that, purposely putting your body in a stressful position allows your body to secrete and produce different hormones and neurotransmitters and chemicals that give you an advantage over people who aren't putting themselves in stressful situations. So it's very interesting.
Let's talk about Professor McGonigal for a second,
okay.
Because she is a brilliant science communicator. That is a fantastic TED Talk. And later, she published a book called The Upside of Stress. She talks a little bit in there about the cold pressure test. Now, Kelly has a twin sister, Jane McGonigal. And Jane's a gamer and a game designer, and Jane's written a couple of books too. So I read Kelly's Upside of Stress. I read Jane's Super Better, and what was the other one about reality? I can't remember. But so now I'm reading both the sisters' books, and there's a sharp contrast between them. Jane McGonigal talks about her own personal experiences. She suffered a head injury, brain fog, couldn't work. The therapies that she was getting, the diagnosis she was getting, wasn't working at all. She designed a game to help her own brain heal. And it's in, Reality Bites? She talks about it in Super Better. She gamified her therapy to improve the function of her brain. It's a very personal book. Kelly McGonigal, on the other hand, when she talks about herself, she says, well, I had a student in my class. She doesn't talk about what she's gone through personally. One of them, the professor at Stanford, Kelly, she's got a PhD. The other is just a game designer and an author without the formal education that I have. One of the things that we learn in science is to separate our personal experience, leave that out. Don't talk about personal experience. Just talk about observations and data. And so Kelly has been true to that in her Upside of Stress. But Jane, because she's a game designer, she's a storyteller, and she tells her stories in a very personal way, first person. Here's what Kelly McGonigal, when she talks about the cold pressure test, she talks about using it in the lab. She talks about how psychologists will study the stress response by immersing the non-dominant hand in a bowl of ice water. That freaks the subjects out. They begin to perspire. Their heart rate goes up. And this gives us a sense of how well they respond to stress. She never talks about whether she's ever done it. She never talks about, and then I put my hand in the cold water, and then I felt blah, 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 blah. And I know she's never done it because on page like 186, she's trying to give the reader an appreciation of how difficult the cold pressure test is. And she says, if you immersed your whole body in ice water, you'd be dead in 2 minutes. You can look this up in her book. You can highlight it like I did. And then, you finish reading that and you're like, I must be dead. Because I've been in there up to 22 minutes. I know a 13-year-old girl who saw Joe Rogan, and she says 20 minutes is nothing. She was in there for half an hour before her mother pulled her out. And I'll tell you that story and why, because it's like, I'm not encouraging other people to do it, but this girl has cerebral palsy. She doesn't have the same sensations below the waist that you and I have. And the cold feels really good on her feet. Like she doesn't feel her feet in the way that we're accustomed to until she gets in the cold. She's not a real daredevil. She's thermoregulates differently, and she likes feeling that stuff. So yeah, her and her mom, we pulled her out a half an hour and said, you prove your point, and that's enough. The point is, Kelly McGonigal has never been in the ice bath. She's writing about it from the perspective of of a theorist,
Mm.
She doesn't tell us how she manages her stress. She tells us about the study that they did on other people managing stress. So when I write my book, I don't want to be like Kelly. I don't want to be like Jane. I want both. I want to tell you about this. You got it. This is what happened to me when I did it. This is what the study says the mechanisms are. I want to blend the science and the experience of cold exposure so the people can relate to it as a story. And for those people who are curious, they can go look up the journal articles if they want. There's data that backs it up, that gives them some good intuitions about what they want to try first. And I can tell you, Professor McGonigal, although I've never met her, it's not like I'm going to bump into her at a conference or something. And I've been to Stanford several times, but I've never looked her up. 2 minutes of cold exposure will not kill you.
Fair enough.
She's since moved on. She writes about other things now.
Makes sense. It's the first time I've ever mentioned that and had someone actually know who she is and have additional information. That's cool. It's interesting. The 2 minutes thing is pretty short, I would say, as an expectation of killing you in 2 minutes, as if that's never happened to somebody even before cold exposure became a popular thing. I mean, I've surfed in January with a wetsuit on. It's still, freaking cold, but
Yep.
It's different. What do you think about that, by the way? Surfing, what do you think about a wetsuit as opposed to when you wear the full suit with the gloves and boots and hats, that you get that what they call ice cream headache? So when you duck dive under a wave, the wave is coming, you're paddling out, you have to go underneath it. You do that 3-4 times in a row on a full set that's coming at you, and your head is just ringing with freezingness, almost like brain freeze. Would you consider that something beneficial or something harmful? Something
I don't think it's beneficial.
No.
For me,
but for the head, it's different than the body.
Yeah. When I do a shower, I don't let the shower spray on the top of my head. I don't like it. I don't think it's good for me. I don't think it's beneficial. I will all over my shoulders or on my chest or even my neck, but I keep the real cold water off the top of my head. When I do an ice bath, I like doing a dunk. I never stop breathing. Do not do a breath hold underwater in the ice bath. So especially if you've been doing Wim Hof hyperventilation, just don't do breath holds with ice bath. But when I dunk, it's no more than 10 seconds, and I'll do a continuous breathing out. I've snorkeled around in a friend's bath. It was only 50 degrees, and I could stay in there all day, but I'm always breathing, even if my face is in the water. When I dunk, I go in quick. My head's up at the top. Even though the water will cover the top of my head, it's near as cold as when you're diving under a wave.
Makes sense.
My experience is body surfing, Nantucket Island. I don't know, you might be familiar with it. It's just a little further up the Gulf Stream from you on the Jersey Shore. If you're in Nantucket Sound, that's the north part of the island, water's warm. But if you're on the south part of the island, that's the Atlantic Ocean. It gets wicked cold. I've experienced that ice cream head that you're talking about. I don't think it's ever done me any good. Cold water from the waist down, yeah, I think it's done me a lot of good. And there's nothing wrong with a wetsuit. If you're going to be out there 3 or 4 hours, then you're going to get a lot of heat extraction. The wetsuit is going to help you, especially because, I don't know, my skin used to chafe when I was on the board or on the raft. And
even in the summer, I like wearing the suit. It's better even in the summer.
Right.
The chafe is number one reason.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
There, it's miserable.
Yep. However, the dunking that you're doing, because you want to get under a wave and you want to get out there, I don't think it's doing your head any good to have all that cold water on the top. And let me tell you a story that kind of backs it up. Why were our ancestors in the cold water? We are aquatic apes. If you buy that human beings belong in the ape family, and a lot of people don't want to hear that because we really shouldn't be compared to chimpanzees, but we are primates and we share 99% of our DNA with bonobos and stuff. There's a lot of things that make us. Sorry, say again?
So that's definitely significant. Worth noting.
Right. I'm talking anatomically, not spiritually or in a religious. We share a lot of anatomy with apes, but there are very important differences. One of them is we have subcutaneous fat. That is fat right below the skin. I got plenty of it. Apes don't have that. Another is our nostrils point down. Chimpanzees, orangutans, they point out. Another is, they got all this hair. We don't have a lot of hair. Mm-hmm. And here's the most interesting one. Human babies are born knowing how to swim, with a swim instinct. A giraffe comes out of its mother and it's like up on its long legs and is running around on the plains. And our kids aren't like that. Our kids are born knowing how to swim. We are made for the water because we have these anatomical features that are in common with dolphins and whales and aquatic mammals, and not with, orangutans and chimpanzees. Why are we made for the water? Because that's where our ancient ancestors lived. How the heck did Homo sapiens survive the Ice Age? You got the oldest fossil cells or samples that have been found in the world are in East Africa. And so at least the hypothesis that maybe Homo sapiens emerged in East Africa. Well, what do they have in East Africa? There are 4 active glaciers on the equator in East Africa to this day. But during the Ice Age, it meant that the few human beings that existed in the world were packed between the glacier and the ocean. Even though they're on the equator and there's plenty of sunshine and the air can be warm, the water was cold. And unlike other primates, we went into the cold water to forage, to fish, and to give birth. This is why, because the water, first of all, it reduces the pains of contraction, the ease of the labor, and has an analgesic effect. So our ancient grandmothers, they must have gone into these glacier melt streams to give birth to the next generation. And this is why the babies have the instinct to swim. So if you've ever seen like an orangutan wading across a stream, you get it. You understand why we walk on 2 feet, where all the other close relatives are, quadrupeds, because we were fishing. We were looking for to eat the shellfish and the creatures that live in the water. And that probably helped the development of some pre-Homo sapien, some other hominid brain. We're built for cold exposure. We are not built to have our heads underwater all the time. We're aquatic, but we're not whales. We're not dolphins. Free diving is extraordinarily dangerous, because people suffocate and drown. Yeah. What we were meant to do is spearfish, collect clams, oysters, mussels, grab the fish with our hands. Occasionally, our nostrils point down because sometimes we have to go underwater. And when you dive underwater, you don't want the water like pushing up into your nasal cavity. But don't put a lot of cold water on your head. Your, great ancient Grandma Eve would have never done it, and you're not built for it either.
All right, that makes sense. Now I have an excuse not to do it this winter.
Right, you got a good story.
Yeah, I'll bring the longboard. I'll try to keep my head down.
If you're surfing, you can't avoid it. Like, you want to get out where they're going to break. So
you got no choice. The wave's coming at you. Right. In that moment, you're out there. You're like, there's nothing you could do. All you could do is, if it's the first wave of the set, you can turn around and let it push you to shore and be like, I ain't taking those next 3 waves on the head. I'm going in. Right. And sometimes that even isn't how big it is. Exactly. So a couple of things I want to add to that. I'm so happy you talked about this topic, because it's my favorite topic to talk about, is our origins from, like East Africa and like our semi-aquatic, you could say, origins. And I feel like it's not talked about that much, but I love Jack Kruse's philosophy on this. And he's mentioned a couple other things. Something I've noticed as well, a difference between us and chimps, is that we have webbings on our fingers and toes that they don't have as well. Anatomical difference that allows us to swim faster.
Why would that be?
Why would that be? Yeah, so that's another interesting one. And something that I learned from Jack Kruse that I think is super interesting is that we have more DHA in our brains than all other land mammals. And then dolphins and whales have the second most DHA in their brains. So I find that super fascinating as well. I did a post on this not too long ago. And I've always
recommended the concept of He
ocean.
recommended a book on the relationship between food and the evolution of the human brain. It's a $182 book. I went ahead and bought it. Amazon says they delivered it. I don't know what I did with it. And it's such an important link that I'm like, God dang it, I'm probably going to spend another $182 to just because I lost the first one, you know. But I'm a professor. You can see I like accumulate books like some people collect baseball cards. The point is the relationship between the shellfish and the finfish that our aquatic ancestors must have been eating and the development of our brain, that's not a coincidence. I know people, they don't like seafood. And, you know, they won't eat it because they don't like the texture. They don't like the taste. It's a dang shame because I'll open up a can of sardines and I happen to like all different kinds of seafood. And I'm not in an environment in Phoenix where, you know, I can go down to the ocean and pull my own lobster out of it. So I got to get the canned foods a lot, but it's packed full of things that my brain needs and that my ancient ancestors sort of grew up on.
Yeah, anecdotally myself, I think this is actually super interesting. I never ate seafood my entire life until very recently, about a year ago. I actually also never ate meat for the majority of my life until about almost 2 years ago. So that was just, I had some serious digestive issues back in the day, and certain foods just kind of like scared me off as a kid. And then I never really ate them until I had a reason, until I fixed my gut with certain things and then was able to digest foods without getting heartburn from fucking everything I ever ate. So that's the reason. Yeah. But I just recently started exploring seafood and I feel light years different. I feel sharper. I was already pretty sharp, but I feel a different level of just mental clarity and energy and sleep quality. And it's pretty interesting. And now I like, honestly, a lot of it. I don't love oysters. I also don't love the sauces that people use on the oysters. So I just do straight lemon juice oysters. And they're honestly not delicious, but they're not disgusting. So I get them down.
Yes, they are. They're the snot of the ocean.
I don't think they're that bad. Without the lemon juice, they're bad. But with the lemon juice, they're okay. They're like tolerable. And I noticed the difference when I haven't had them even for like a week. And in Jersey, we have oysters galore here. So especially when I'm, you know, down at the shore, we have some of the best seafood like that I've ever like seen.
I agree.
It's the oyster quality is just unbelievable. And when I eat them, I feel totally different. Like wake up humping your bed, but like wake up with, you know, a different level of energy and like, I don't know, clarity. So anecdotally, I definitely have noticed a difference. And now oysters were the first thing. Oysters and salmon were the two that I originally started dabbling with. And now recently I've been really going into the sushi stuff. So I've been having a bunch of other types of fish and having variety. I tried like the salmon eggs. I tried sea urchin this weekend for my birthday. I tried like red snapper, fluke. I got like the whole platter of all the raw fish. And it's unbelievable. I woke up the next day feeling unbelievable. My performance in the gym, I'm just totally different. So, I mean, it's been cool for me to have the different contrasts of experience of not having any of it at all. And then kind of exploring meat and beef and buffalo and that kind of stuff and eggs. And then adding fish on top of that and noting the differences and really coming to the conclusion that we kind of need all of these things. And before that, I did a period where I just only ate fruit for a very long period of time, a couple of years, because fruit was the only food that wouldn't give me heartburn. So in the moment, I was like, oh, I pretty much solved my problem. But then anytime I would eat something that's not fruit, I would get the heartburn again. And then it wasn't until I lived in Hawaii and got introduced to raw milk from a farmer in Hawaii that my gut started to fix itself. And then some things lit up in my brain. And I was like, this is some serious shit right here. Like, I got to figure out, like, dive deeper into this. And then from there, I continued, started eating meat, started eating eggs again, started doing like a bunch of other stuff. And I think really it was raw milk kefir that really fixed my gut and allowed me to do things. And then now I can pretty much eat whatever without heartburn. And this opened up a whole door of foods that I could eat. And it's completely changed my life. I gained like 35 pounds. So it's been pretty profound in my life for sure.
I've seen your before pictures, Nick, and the way that you're explaining your diet and your gut. Now I'm like, oh, okay. It makes sense.
Yep.
The fruit is a real controversial one. I've talked to Paul Saladino about it because, he wrote this book called The Carnivore Code, and now he's changed it to animal-based. and it's confusing for people. But Saladino has tried vegetarian, he's tried vegan. He didn't go carnivore because vegetarian was working so good for him, you know?
Yeah.
It's an evolution of ideas that he's tried out. And now he's worked fruits. He lives down in Costa Rica, so you can get fruit all the time.
I'm familiar with Saladino.
And it makes sense. Say again?
I'm familiar with Saladino. I've been following him for a while.
Yeah. When you think about it, I'm going to think about my ancestors. Do you think it's summertime, it's June, whatever, and they come across a blueberry patch? Do you think they're not going to eat the damn blueberries? Do you think they're going to go chasing rabbits around or something? Like, of course they're going to eat the blueberries in fall. They're going to eat the apples. Now, the apples have been so hybridized, and like there's a lot of apples that aren't good for you. But fruit in season is what my great, ancient ancestors would eat. Now, where were they going to get fruit in the wintertime? I stopped eating avocados. I'm here in Phoenix. We can get all the avocados we want up from Mexico whenever we want them. But I stopped eating them because I'm like, I don't think granddad ever peeled an avocado. It's just not something that my ancestors would have had access to. But honey, blueberries, tree fruits, cherries, when they're in season, I'll eat them too.
Yeah, especially in the summer here in Jersey, I go pick them. I don't even like going to the stores. They're in season. I'll go to the farm.
Peaches, up a tree. Plums, absolutely.
Favorite. Peaches and blueberries are my top two. Easy.
Yep.
The best. But yeah, in the winter, I mean, I do freeze them sometimes because I do love smoothies. I like to make smoothies throughout the winter, but I am a big advocate for the concept of local, seasonal food. So I prefer not to eat food that comes from other places. Like even now in the summer here in Jersey, I try not to eat bananas. I don't really eat that many avocados. We don't have them here. So I feel like back to what you were saying before about the major things, how we're not machines and how food is information, the number one thing that food teaches us is what's going on in our environment. If you're eating food that was shipped from across the world, it's confusing your body and teaching you that you're in an environment that you're not in. So that's
correct.
Not beneficial to your body in the way that I feel like some people make it out to be, depending on even what it is. And avocado is a great fruit. There's a lot of different research on what it has in it as far as like the fats and the, different minerals and whatever, boron, for lots of different problems that you may have. But if you don't have avocados near you, it shouldn't be an option. It's not supposed to be an option. And if we think that we need avocados to have higher HDL, we really should be looking into things a little bit deeper. But yeah, same thing with like, any other fruits. And it was cool for me. I lived in the Dominican Republic for a while. So in the heat of the summer, I was picking mangoes off the ground, or I was eating, different stuff. And now that I'm back in Jersey, it's different stuff too. In Hawaii, it was passion fruits. It was papayas. Now it's, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, peaches, plums, apricots, cherries. I mean, I really do love Jersey for the food, man. I got like pretty much the best food network I've ever had anywhere I've ever lived. I lived in some of the most tropical, beautiful places in the world. I get the best food right here in Jersey where I grew up. We get the best.
It's the Garden State.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we get the great seafood. We get really great fruit in the summer. And out in Lancaster, PA, only a couple hours away, we get some really high quality animal foods, really good high quality dairy and meat. So I don't even know if I'll ever move away from here again for long periods of time, because just the food network is just so solid. So anybody who's thinking about, leaving Jersey, it might not be the best move. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about what everybody is most likely waiting for on this interview that they know I'm going to ask you.
If you made it this far, then thank you for being here, and congratulations, because I have something very exciting to offer you. Every few months, I host an intensive program called Breathwork Bootcamp. It's a 9-day program where for 9 days in a row, we get on Zoom for multiple hour classes where I teach about all things about health, everything that I mentioned in the Breath Bosses community. I teach in complete depth, in complete detail for 9 days so that you can absolutely maximize your efficiency when it comes to learning all this stuff, so you can get into action and start applying it immediately. This program comes with complete courses of all of those topics. So you get the Natty Nutrition course, the Synchronized Circadian System course, the Metabolic Muscle Method course, the Avoid and Poison course, the Top T Testosterone Optimization course, the Back to Lifestyle Executor course, the Alpha Abs Abdominal Control course, and of course the TCM Breath course. If you've been diving into my work and you want to get everything that I really have to offer in one streamlined program with lots of access to asking me questions personally in real time, this is the program for you. And since you made it this far into the podcast, I'm offering you $600 off of either Breathwork Bootcamp package. And all you have to do to receive this discount is click the link in the description to book a call with me for more information. And in the form, as you fill it out to book the call, use the discount code IceBath600 and you'll be offered $600 off of that program if it ends up working out and making sense for you and you decide to sign up. Again, thank you guys for being here. If you made it this far, I know this information is really, really interesting. And if you made it this far, then I guess you agree with me that it is pretty interesting because you're still here. So let's get into, in my opinion, the most fascinating topic of this entire podcast episode. Run it.
Let's talk about cold exposure and testosterone. So I've seen your posts about it. I've seen a lot of testimonies that you've posted from people about it. So let's dive into that and unpack it a little bit and the best, strategies for people to employ for testosterone. Realistically, what you say here is most likely going to end up in one of my programs and courses as a recommendation. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I guess I'll give you my interpretation of what I've learned from your post first. So maybe you could get a sense of, how your posts come across to somebody like me, and then you can clarify anything that I may have wrong. So basically, and don't get me wrong, I don't have a very thorough understanding of this, just very brief from looking at your Instagram. So it seems that pre-workout ice baths seem to be the move as opposed to post-workout ice baths. And that pre-cooling, I guess, prevents your body and your muscles from getting too hot in your workout. You're already pre-cooled, so it allows you to just have better performance. I don't know the specific mechanisms behind it for testosterone, but I would guess that it's something dopamine related if I had to speculate myself, or perhaps, cortisol lowering for some people that would help with the testosterone, but that's not a specific mechanism for increasing testosterone or free testosterone lowering cortisol. So my guess would be that it would be dopamine related perhaps, or something in the Leydig cells. I know keeping your testicle temperature low is good for fertility and spermatogenesis and things like that. So perhaps it could just be the testicle temperature lowering that helps with testosterone. I've seen different things, but from what I've researched, it's been more on fertility than testosterone when it comes to regulating testicle temperature.
Yep.
I said that wrong.
Agreed.
Okay. So when it comes to pre-workout ice baths, I've also seen you say that it doesn't necessarily matter if it's right away, like ice bath, and then work out in your basement like immediately after the ice bath, or if it's like 20-30 minutes to drive to the gym or go do that. But it is kind of a concern that your body temperature can perhaps go lower after the ice bath as the blood goes out to your extremities and back. It goes, the warm blood goes to your fingers, comes back to the core colder. You actually get colder throughout the warming up process. So you might not want to be driving a car during that period of time. I think you said it was like the drive to the gym after the ice bath was more dangerous than the ice bath or something like that. So
I did 14 minutes and I should not have been operating heavy machinery.
Makes sense. Okay. So I guess that's kind of the full scope of what I've learned from your posts on that topic. Is there anything you want to add, or is there anything I got wrong?
Well, yeah, let me add some context to my research. This was a total accident. I had no idea. I wasn't even trying to do anything with testosterone. I discovered this because, I'm trying to get myself together. I'm separated from my wife. I'm dating again. I'm trying to get healthy. I've lost a lot of weight. I go in Arizona, you can order your own blood tests. So I go into the lab and I'm like, yeah, give me the whole male health panel. Well, that's testosterone and cholesterol and stuff, and something called prostate specific antigen. Now, at this point, I'm 51 years old, and I haven't had a prostate exam. I'm not getting physicals. Of course, like a lot of dudes, I don't like going to the doctor. I just kind of want to know where my blood work is. And am I clear of STDs and all these basic like health things that a guy who's trying to get his act together and start dating is going to be concerned of. PSA comes back. Big red exclamation mark, triangle, out of range. And I was at like 7.8. Well, what the hell does that mean? And I got to go Google all this stuff. Turns out that if you have a PSA of 7.8, it's an indication of an inflamed prostate. So they ask you a lot of questions. Are you having trouble urinating? Or is your urine stream being interrupted? And I'm like, I don't know. Like all of a sudden, I'm so self-conscious about my own urination that I'm like having trouble urinating. It's like driving myself nuts and thinking if I go to the doctor, they're going to want, even though the PSA is an unreliable indicator of cancer, it just says inflammation, but they're going to want to do a prostate exam, which means fingers up the butt. And then they're going to say, get a biopsy. And biopsies have their own risks. So you can make fun of me for being a wimp and not wanting any of that. But before I had the courage to do it, I said, I'm going to start talking to guys about their prostate. Guys older than me, guys younger than me. Nobody talks about this. Women will talk about sex and the shape of their boobs and you know what, they're constantly comparing with one another. But no guy is going to go and say, hey, you know, how's your stream? Is your flow still good? Like, we just don't talk about these things. Yeah. So I started bringing it up with my friends and they go like, well, yeah, you know, I had a biopsy. It was terrible. Thank God it came back negative, but you know, it was painful. Another friend of mine, very close. And he's like, I had my prostate removed. What? When did you do that? Oh yeah, it was about 9 months ago. What? But we're friends. You never told me. Well, it's not really the kind of thing that you talk about much. And I go, well, how's your function? He goes, I haven't had a hard on since. You know, I'm like, this was not a future. I wanted zero contact with the medical establishment. I was determined, maybe in my shame or my self-consciousness, to try and deal with this on my own. So what am I going to do? I'm going to do keto and ice baths. So I was cycling in and out of keto. I was doubling down on the ice baths because I knew that would help with the keto. And I'm like, I'm going to give it 6 months, see where this goes. Testosterone was part of the male lipid panel, but I wasn't even paying any attention. I was at like 700, high 600s, something everybody would say, oh, no, you're fine. You're healthy.
That's pretty decent.
I got my, right? Like a lot of guys would be, at my age, would be happy with that.
Yeah, that's not terrible.
Well, I got my PSA down to 0.8. Thank God. It took a few months, but the report comes back. And now there's a different red triangle exclamation mark out of range. And it's the testosterone. And it was 1180 nanograms per deciliter. What the hell is that? Like, it explained a few things, you know, and I'm not saying I was upset about it, but now I'm like, how does this make sense? And I had to shift all my research from the prostate. I'm like, okay, that's over. And figure out this testosterone thing. Turns out there's a study from 1991 in Japan. They took these young guys and they put them in an ice bath and they put them on a bicycle. Testosterone went way up. Luteinizing hormone went way up. And they reversed it. Bicycle, then ice bath, which is the way everybody does it. Exercise first and then ice bath for recovery. Testosterone way down. Luteinizing hormone way down. I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. I went to my urologist.
How long did it take to go back to baseline in that study? The LH and the
how long did it take? Say that again.
Back to baseline.
To baseline?
Like it went up, and then how long did it take to go back down?
Nobody measured them. Like nobody woke the Japanese guys up the next morning and say, "Hey, we're going to do another blood sample." You know, they saw an immediate boost. But I've been monitoring since, and so when was the last time I had it? Can't remember. It was a few months ago. It was this spring. And testosterone is seasonal. It goes up and down with vitamin D. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't expect that the springtime is where you have a lot of vitamin D or you're going to get the max testosterone. It's also circadian. That is, you get the most testosterone in the morning and then it declines. But, you know, it was April or something. And I went in the morning, get my testosterone checked, and I was not 1180. I was like 1040. In other words, you know, I'm 57 now. And for me to have anything over 1,000 at any time of year, at any time of day, some guys would consider that miraculous. But other guys are writing to me and they're like, Tom, I'm 62 years old. I just tested out at 1210. And I'm like, God bless you. Or times guys will write to me and they'll say, well, I started the ice bath and then, you know, I'm rewarming the way you said. I do some push-ups and I do a little leg exercise. For one guy, he's just doing like the soccer mom power walk. You know, that's all he does for exercise after his ice bath. He goes, and I got a question. Is it normal to wake up in the middle of the night with a hard on? And I'm like, it is for you now.
Yeah.
For a lot of guys, it's like going back in time to when they were 19, because their doctors are telling them that you lose testosterone over time. I don't believe that anymore.
I think
I
it's
believe you lose, right?
Yep.
Because you're not taking care of your metabolism, because you bought into this idea of aging, you decline over time. You've lost all the brown fat. You're not doing any cold. You're not getting the sunshine. Because lots of things happen to men, testosterone declines with age, but it doesn't have to be that way. Right now, you've probably seen the data. The testosterone of a 25-year-old today is typical of what a 65-year-old had 20 years ago. Why should men today be declining over time when men 20 years ago weren't? And the answer is
it's actually worse. I've seen,
you're probably
the
right.
average 65-year-old 50 years ago had 11 something, 1140 or something. And now the average 25-year-old is about 500.
Right.
So actually, a 65-year-old
say you're normal.
had more than double. Yeah, and it's normal.
Yeah.
I had 328 total testosterone when I was done with the restrictive dieting and I was just starting to introduce animal foods into my diet. 328 total testosterone, 6 nanograms per deciliter of free testosterone. Like, unhealthy, really, really freaking bad. And none of it got flagged. I just did my own research and I'm like, 300 sounds kind of low. Like, let me check that out. And then, I'm learning about the average numbers from back in the day. I'm learning, deciding that really we should be like 800 to 1200 for my age group, even higher. Yep. The average 25-year-old 50 years ago had over 1200. It was like 1250 or something. That was average. That's not even like above average. So, how many different effects is this having, considering testosterone affects our insulin sensitivity, our muscle protein synthesis, our mental health, our confidence, our metabolic health, our cardiovascular health, our calcium regulation, so many different things that testosterone does. If everybody is walking around with half the testosterone they're supposed to have, this is fucking up everything.
Yep.
So that's why I kind of dedicated my research to diving into testosterone fully, because it was, something super relevant to me. I needed to figure this out for myself. And what's interesting is cold exposure wasn't even one that I really went into. I actually might add it as a pillar. The ones that I've focused on,
all brand new.
Nutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, overall like caloric surplus. Then we have sleep quality and sleeping enough. We have training and just challenging your body in some way, like environmental stress, competition, competing with other men, whether it's for status or resources or whatever. And then we have sunlight exposure, of course, and avoiding endocrine disruptors. I dove down that rabbit hole of all the plastics and all of the xenoestrogens and the birth control in the tap water and all that stuff. And then, of course, the sex, which is what most people think it's honestly, I think, one of the least important. But I was a big advocate for a period of time of semen retention, which makes sense because I had super low T. It was easy for me to retain. And now, as I got into it, researched a little bit more, it made less and less sense. And now I'm an advocate completely against semen retention. And for prostate.
Yeah, I don't think semen retention.
It's not it.
Is hell. It's never worked for me. Like, and you can say, well, have you ever really tried it? Nope. Like, I've never really gone all in on the semen retention. But you have identified nutritional, psychological, and environmental factors, and they all work together. I can tell you that keto is good for testosterone, and I was kind of conscious about
that's something
my diet
when it comes to keto, because SHBG is a huge one when it comes to free testosterone, and the biggest lower, other than boron, of SHBG is insulin. So to be consuming less carbs, like one of the biggest things I recommend for dudes who have high SHBG is just switch out your macro split and eat a little bit more carbs, and usually that ends up lowering their SHBG. Which is why with my dad, with the insulin sensitivity issue, with the taking insulin, not wanting to take more insulin, so not wanting to eat more carbs for that reason, we're still kind of in a gray area how we're figuring that out. But the insulin sensitivity is the thing we're trying to max out. But yeah, for a lot of guys, eating more carbs tends to help with free testosterone. So I think a big thing when it comes to keto is when guys go keto, they usually eat significantly less processed foods, and they're eating less like shit in general. So they're getting more micronutrients, more retinol, more copper, selenium, zinc, all these micronutrients that are deficient in most people. You're just eating more meat, eating more eggs, eating more, fat soluble vitamins. And I think that's the major contributor when it comes to keto for people with the increase in testosterone. But I've seen some guys coming off keto that work with me that have pretty high SHBG. So the These are the guys that'll come in with a 800-900 total T, but with like a 9 nanogram per deciliter free testosterone and want to get that above 15. They add some carbs back in, and that ends up being really the only thing they have to do. Or they need to just eat more calories in general. But I've found nutrition to be one of the most prominent issues that most guys have when it comes to testosterone. It's just micronutrient deficiencies. You get enough zinc, you eat oysters for 1 week, and then boom, you're good. You're back up to 1,000. So for most guys, I feel like nutrition, if I had to pin it down to one biggest thing why guys have low testosterone, it's micronutrient deficiencies. And if I had to name number 2, it'd probably be sleep. But in general,
have low, not by any diagnostic.
No, I wouldn't even consider yours to be low. 600-700 is solid. That's higher than average for a 25.
Right. But the boost that I got didn't have anything to do with anything in your program. I mean, I recognize the importance of all those factors. The boost that I got is because I started doing ice baths, and I'd come out of the ice bath and I'd be so dang cold, I'd have to do something to warm myself up, or I'd do it before I leave for campus and I'd walk 1.5 miles. Like, it doesn't take a lot of exercise, just enough to get your blood going again.
Find this so fascinating. I'm definitely planning on doing my own little study with myself. I love to experiment with it.
I'd love to hear it.
And be my own case study for everything. So you'll be hearing some kind of testimony from me probably in like a month or two. I'm going to get my blood work done, and we'll see what's up with it, because I love getting blood work and seeing where I'm at. So I'll definitely give you a testimonial when it works out, which based on what I've heard from you, you seem pretty confident. So I'm excited to give this a go. And honestly, I've been
now it's men all over the world are writing to me and sending me their labs and saying, hey, look, this is working for me too. Thank you so much. And it's not part of the popular conversation. Most people, like, I wrote an article and I put it up there, but it wasn't until Joe Rogan found it in December of 2022. This was right after Liver King was, unmasked. Like, Liver King wasn't on steroids. Like, everybody knew. Nobody would actually care if he said, of course I take roids. Look at me. People would have been like, yeah, you're still kind of fun to watch. But he lied about it. And so Rogan had Derek, More Plates, More Dates, who knows way more about testosterone than I know. He had him on the show and they were talking about making fun of him. Well, Rogan found my article and he read out an excerpt of it on his Joe Rogan Experience. He did not mention me. He didn't cite me. But if you pause the video and you like zoom in and you say, who is that guy? You can find Seager TP, Seager TP. And then people started writing to me on the gram. I had like 2,000 followers, like not even. And they started writing in. They said, I think I found the article. Was that you? And then what do you do? And then the article took off. And now people like you who are really on the leading edge, they're thinking about it, talking about it, trying it. And the results so far that people are sending back to me are terrific. I have yet to get somebody who bothers to write to me and say, hey, I tried that ice bath and exercise thing. It stunk and my testosterone went down and I hate you. It could happen because I don't know how everybody's body is going to work. But right now, people are saying this is working really well.
I'm excited to try it out. So everybody listen and give it a go.
I want to hear.
It works out for me. I'm definitely going to add it to my, my toolkit that I recommend for people. So
that is great.
Good to know. I like to just have a lot of tools in the toolkit. For some people, it's it's different causes, different things. Some people have different issues. Some people have high prolactin. Some people have low dopamine. Some people have a bunch of different things going on. And it's interesting to find what the solution is. I wonder, do you know what the mechanism is? Have you speculated or like tried to really put to thought, like, what is it about the cold exposure that makes testosterone go up? I would love to know. I would love to know.
I have not even hypothesized. I do think that there's something psychological. You come out of the ice bath and you feel like you cheated death. You feel like freaking Superman. Yep. And that energy's got to go somewhere. So I get my steel mace out. That was one of my favorite exercises. Ever since Leo Savage taught me how to do 360s, now I got like this 25-pound mace. You can see a video. It looks kind of dangerous, but it's not. I'm familiar with and those. Maybe that helps psychologically, Also, my girlfriend has said, Tom, please promise me you will not do anything that increases your testosterone anymore. It's like, I'm tired, and so having the support or the admiration of a beautiful woman, I don't know, maybe that's part of it too. Like this whole yeah. Yep.
It's a status thing too. Like a big proponent, especially with free testosterone levels, are status. So even guys that have like leadership roles in their jobs tend to have higher free testosterone levels than the employees, or, the captain of the team or the highest paid athlete. They always tend to have higher free testosterone just at baseline than other dudes because of that status protection aspect.
Joe Rogan puts me on his Joe Rogan Experience. I got a dope heat and a hit and a testosterone boost from that. Like there's something sociological about it, but I don't think that those are the main factors, because none of those were really important in the Japanese study. And there have been subsequent follow-on study, like the Italian rugby team, for whatever reason, is really worried about their testosterone. And so they hire these scientists to do the kind of cryotherapy thing. There have been other studies that show exercise after cold exposure boosts testosterone. The psychological could be a factor, but I think there are physiological mechanisms. And by the way, in women, there's only one study, and it was the cold pressure test. Just like the Japanese, it wasn't even whole body. It was just cold stim. The Japanese was up to the elbow, but this one study in women, hand goes into the ice water, then they measure the testosterone in the saliva. So we're talking about young women, not menopausal. Young women got a boost just off of cold stimulation, no exercise. Young men did not. And when you think about it, it might make sense. Women and men produce testosterone in different ways. Women, it's produced in the ovaries, and the ovaries are contained inside the body. Why wouldn't they respond differently, to cold than men would? It kind of makes sense. Yeah. But the neat thing is, if women can get a T boost just off of cold stim, the research has never been done, but what would that do for menopausal women, where the ovaries are not as active because they no longer ovulate? A lot of menopausal women, their T levels go down. Women don't realize this, but testosterone is the most important sex hormone in women, just like it is in men. In women have a lot less testosterone than men do, but they have 3 or 4 times the testosterone than they have estrogen. Yep. It is the dominant sex hormone in both sexes. And so when it's low in menopausal women, here's a clinician. They got a woman, she's going through menopause. She's experiencing low libido. They're thinking, hey, maybe some hormone therapy here. If they want to put her on testosterone, there is no FDA-approved program for women. They have to adapt a male TRT to somehow fit into the female body, make it up as they go along, and see whether that works. If we could stimulate endogenous testosterone in menopause, actually in any woman, but in menopausal women in particular, that might be a huge boon. Nobody's tried it.
Super fascinating. I haven't really dove into too much of the information on women. I've really focused on men mostly, but I did know that they do have more testosterone than estrogen, and testosterone is the libido driving hormone in women as well as men. That's pretty much the full scope of testosterone.
Let me speak to your audience for a second.
Go ahead, yeah.
Because your audience is probably mostly men, probably about your age, like not my age, and they have certain concerns.
Well, there's older men in my audience as well. Actually, a lot of my clients are more closer to your age than they are to mine. But there's a pretty good
balance. All right, that's really good to know.
It is mostly men. It's about 60% men, 40% women. There's women that...
so here's what I want to tell them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Get your lady in the ice bath. She will experience a testosterone boost. The testosterone is the lust hormone. Her libido will get a boost that goes with this ice bath experience. And if you can do it together, she's going to love you for it. I did this with my girlfriend in Sedona, and we were having a big fight. I got a slideshow up on it or something. And but we're also doing a photo shoot. So we couldn't send the photographers home and call it off just because we were having a fight. We get into the ice bath, we breathe, we stare into one another's eyes, and it was like a love potion. The next thing you know, she leans over, we're kissing, we're making out in the ice bath. The camera crew is like, okay, we got it. We're ready to go home. And and we're still hugging. We just fell in love all over again. So I had to do an article on about it. It's not just testosterone.
You said
It's
oxytocin too, right?
Oxytocin.
Yeah.
It's say again?
I was going to say, you mentioned oxytocin earlier. That's the love chemical, the affection.
Vasopressin goes up. All of these bonding hormones go up. And it's also helpful that we were in the sunshine, because years later, the study came out that showed when female rats are exposed to UV light, they become more receptive to male rats' advances. And I'm like, nobody told me when I was at the beach, this would have been critical information.
That's hilarious.
Now I know.
Yeah. I mean, for men, I've seen a couple studies on like sunlight exposure increasing testosterone or stimulating testosterone production overall. And that's an interesting one because sunlight, as opposed to some other things, similar to nutrition, takes a really long time to go back down to baseline. So like, let's say you get in the sun. This was a study from 1939, Dr. Abraham Myerson. They tested guys with sun exposure on different parts of their body. So they did I think it was a week or 5 days worth of sun exposure on their chest, just to the point like right before they were going to get out of the sun, and their testosterone went up. I believe the chest group, it was 125%, and one group also sunned both their chest and their genitals, and that group got a 200% increase over the 5 days. And
that's consistent with the stuff I've seen.
Yeah. And what was cool about it is they studied how long it stayed up high for. So they got completely out of the sun afterwards. And it took 8 days to go back to baseline. So 8 days of no sunlight exposure at all for it to go back to what it was prior to the experiment. So I think realistically, these guys must have all been sunlight deficient to some degree where prior to the study. And then they went up to where they should be. And then it took 8 days to develop the sunlight deficiency and go back down to where they were before.
That makes total sense.
I saw you post recently, and this has been something people have asked me about actually pretty decently a lot. Sunlight UVB and DNA damage, and how that damage gets repaired in 24 hours, and how a lot of the claims that, sunlight causes DNA damage, like it's no good, we should avoid the sun and wear sunscreen and all that, is BS. So anything, I just want to cover that topic. It's something that I've rarely talked about on the podcast, and I think you'd be an interesting person to talk about it with. So what's your take on sunscreen?
I don't use it anymore. And I used to feel guilty if I didn't use it. I'm not doing the right thing. And I'm fairly fair-skinned. I have a lot of relatives who are fair-skinned, and they totally bought into this melanoma, whatever. My father has had skin cancer, but he died morbidly obese. He had like 6 different kinds of cancers in his body at the time of his death, and none of those killed him. That is, what I've seen is sun exposure is associated with longer life. That even when there are increased rates of melanoma, the skin cancer that is associated with increased sun exposure is less deadly. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, and this is at the periphery of my expertise. So I've been trying to learn. One of the best spoken, or one of my favorite authors on ultraviolet light is Hollick. I think he's in Boston, but he publishes quite a bit. And one of the things I like about his studies is that he will do the science, but he'll occasionally speak in a really common sense way. And he had this paragraph in one of his papers, I think it was in a book on photobiomodulation, where he said, the idea that sun is dangerous for you makes no sense from an evolutionary standpoint. He might have even called it absurd. Our bodies are built by evolution to expect ultraviolet light exposure. We are photosynthetic creatures. We rely on the sun for the energy to synthesize our vitamin D. And nothing could be more obvious than to say we need sunshine to make vitamin D. You can get a little bit in your diet, and that might help you get through the winter. but you synthesize vitamin D, you store these precursors. There's so many different formulations of vitamin D in your body. You get through the winter because your body is designed to store up what you need during the summer. The idea that sunlight is somehow dangerous and unhealthy is an absurd extrapolation of what happens when you get the sunburn. I don't like sunburn. I don't want to get the sunburn. And the dose, they say, makes the poison, right? Of course, you can overexpose people to ultraviolet radiation. Of course, if you take an English seaman and, like a sailor, and you deprive him of vitamin C and you feed him on gruel and hardtack for a month, and then you sail him down to the equator and then leave him out in the, Caribbean or whatever the hell it is, exposed to the sun, you can create a state of dis-ease. So I'm not recommending that you go out and you burn yourself. What I'm saying is sunscreens probably do more damage than the sun does. I don't put them on my skin anymore, despite the fact that I have cousins and relatives with a history of dangerous skin cancers. All survived it, by the way. But despite the fact that I'm related to people who are super cautious about it, I have thrown that caution to the wind. I want the sunshine. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. 2 weeks ago, I spent the afternoon out on the lake, sailing around. I didn't use sunscreen then either. And I've been trying to teach myself more about UVA, UVB, thinking about what would it be like to try and get a UV lamp approved by the FDA for vitamin D therapy, so people didn't have to take supplements anymore. It's a huge undertaking, as it turns out. And the FDA, they're not entirely hostile, but they're pretty aggressive against UV lamps and tanning lamps.
Right here.
Yeah, I've got one too. It is 1970s technology. Like, you got your fluorescent tubes in there. You got that timer. You got like the metal cage. And it reminds me of the kind of thing, like if I wanted to watch Speed Racer, when I was a little kid and I had to get channel 56 or so. Like, this is ancient technology. The Spurdy lamp, in their defense, it goes way back. It predates the FDA. And it is the only tanning lamp that is approved by the FDA, partly because Spurdy is, if I remember this correctly, it's the name of a doctor who invented a lamp that people could use for phototherapy. And this is what we have. But partly because they don't have any real competition, you get this crappy, fluorescent tube technology. Who knows what you're dosing? I want a digital lamp. I filed a provisional patent on an LED narrowband UVB with a peak at 309 nanometers, avoiding the UVA. UVA will tan your skin fast, but it does it by oxidizing the melanin in your skin cells and turning it darker. It's a great defense mechanism because you need that dark right away before you get sunburned. But UVB will stimulate the production of new melanin. And that's what I'm going for. That's, for me, the sweet spot between vitamin D production, and it's not maximum vitamin D production, but at 309, it's a sweet spot between vitamin D with least risk of sunburn. So I've prototyped that lamp, but I haven't brought it to market because to market it as a medical device is a huge leap at the FDA, and I haven't even applied yet.
Makes sense. Yeah, when you try to...
That's where that post is coming from. It's not really about cold exposure, although I love rewarming in the sunshine. It's like, when I finish this book on cold exposure, then where am I going to go? I'm going to go into phototherapy.
Interesting. I love that. Yeah, I mean, cold exposure is great, but sunlight's pretty great too. They're both, pieces of the puzzle, So, Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I'm glad we covered that. So, also, back on the ice baths for testosterone thing, you mentioned the pathway was LH. So, LH increased and testosterone increased. So there's got to be something happening brain-wise that's stimulating that release it has to come from GnRH, from the hypothalamus. So I'm wondering what about the cold exposure could be influencing that? Because I'll say this, the mechanism by which most of the mental stuff takes place, or like the competition or the in the moment, like quick testosterone production, is usually not from LH. It's usually from noradrenaline. So, or, catecholamines in general, dopamine, but mostly noradrenaline. So noradrenaline actually signals for the Leydig cells directly to increase testosterone production, just like LH does, but it's a much faster pathway. So like, let's say I walk up to you and I punch you in the face. You're not increasing LH, you're increasing noradrenaline, and that's going to increase the testosterone and make you fight me. So what's interesting?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
I find it super interesting that it's an LH increase and not, I guess there's also a noradrenaline increase from the cold exposure, but I find it interesting that LH also goes up. So it has to be something that's happening in the brain other than the fight or flight response increasing testosterone. It has to be something mechanistically saying, systemically, we want increased testosterone for long periods of time. Like, we need more testosterone tomorrow morning. So I find that super interesting. Super, super interesting.
Nick, I think you're really onto something. Luteinizing hormone there, the LH, it's not something that I'm allowed to order myself. But after I got my PSA under control, I went to my urologist. I'm like, I should really, share that. He's not going to say you need a biopsy now, right? It's under control. And he looked at my lab reports and he didn't tell me this. He's like, well, I want to do one more test. He didn't tell me that he thought I was juicing. He's like, there's no freaking way this 50-something-year-old guy, still overweight, doesn't work out. How the hell is he going to have a test report like, I just want one more test. Just send me back to the lab. I didn't even know what LH was. I'm just like, okay, they take some more blood out. Report came back. There was another one of those red triangles out of range. My LH was through the roof. And that's how he knew that my body was stimulating the production of that testosterone in my own nads instead of getting it from, a syringe or a chemical plant.
Yeah. And LH goes down.
I don't know why.
Endogenously. So that makes sense. That's like proof is in the pudding right there. Another thing too, your prostate improved as your testosterone went higher. So that's another one that will turn a couple heads and be like, wait, doesn't higher testosterone fuck up your prostate? I don't know, man. I can't believe
not in me.
So much for us would, be directly correlated to, compromised health in just one area of the body, but be so profound and necessary for so many other areas of the body. Similar to my perspective on DHT for hair loss. How DHT is so amazing for so many things. We also see for puberty and for strength and for confidence, things like that. And for it to be responsible for balding, something that is indicative of some kind of deficiency in somewhere, doesn't really seem to be it. But we also see DHT arrive at sites of inflammation. So if the scalp is inflamed, then the DHT could be higher in the scalps of bald men because it's there to fight the inflammation. So it's rather an effect, not a cause. Another thing, I've taken it a little bit step further, and I've seen this also from a couple other people on YouTube, where they noticed that bald guys have tight scalps. Guys that are genuinely bald, their scalp is tight and shiny. But guys like Terry Crews or guys that actually just shave their head but aren't actually bald, their scalps are loose and they can move them around. So that tightness of the scalp can be contributing to the inflammation that leads to the high DHT that's leading to the baldness. But it's the DHT isn't necessarily the cause, it's an effect. It's there to try to combat the inflammation. So just like that with testosterone, when it comes to the prostate, there has to be, in my opinion, I don't have research to support it. I wish there was research that would clarify this, but there's not, at least yet, information to rise up or to bring awareness to potentially another cause that could be the prostate issue that then the testosterone is there to compensate for. Or that tends to happen in guys with higher testosterone, some kind of lifestyle factor that leads to something that has to do with prostate cancer, something like that. I don't know. But, maybe they're just not ejaculating enough or whatever. That's really the only thing where there's really data on. I forget what the term is. It's the prostate something hypothesis where, not ejaculating as frequently as you need to can lead to inflammation in your prostate, things like that over time. So ejaculating somewhat regularly, or at least the very minimum enough to help your prostate health. That's really the only aspect of testosterone with the sex life is just to have a decent sex life. You just have to be like a normal person. You know, you don't have to be extreme, busting nuts like 4 or 5 times a day. You also don't need to extreme like holding semen for 15 months. But, you know, just a regular sex life is really all it comes down to for that. But yeah, I think it's super interesting to dive into. I really wish that I had more degrees so that I can conduct studies on my own and do some more independent.
You don't need more degrees. You're already conducting studies on your own.
Fair
Degrees
enough.
are overrated. I got a lot of them.
It's good to hear that. I've really considered going back and getting my master's and my PhD in something because my degree's in finance. I don't have any degrees related to anything health related. I've really just done independent research for a really long time, and I've read a lot of studies and articles, but I've never gotten any actual degrees in this realm. So it's been a little bit of an obstacle when it comes to certain people that are like, "Oh, you don't have a degree, like you don't really know what you're talking about." And I'm like, I kind of do though. I learned from people with degrees, but
they're buying into the same bullshit cultural narrative that is trying to keep them weak and dependent. It makes no sense to me. Testosterone has had a really bad rap, especially these last 10 years. Toxic masculinity. Oh, testosterone makes you go bald. Testosterone and prostate. Oh, if your testosterone goes up, your prostate's going to suffer. I got an email from a reader who said he tried the ice bath exercise protocol. He read about my stuff and he wanted the testosterone. And had I ever heard of anybody whose hair started growing back after they were doing ice baths? I'm like, wrote him back, nope. And he goes, well, you have now, because I swear to God, I'm getting new hair out of the top of my head at the same time my testosterone is going up. So when it comes to like these popular narratives about testosterone, I don't buy any of them anymore. Like I don't trust a dang thing that is coming out of what Cruz would call centralized medicine. Saladino is really good on this too. He goes to med school down at the University of Arizona, you know, a couple hours south of me here. Mm-hmm. He says, we got like 3 hours of instruction on nutrition, and that is it. Med schools are drug schools. You're not going to get anything from a degree. You kind of got to give yourself your own degree. Every study that amounts, let me rephrase this. Everything with you that you do with your own body is an N=1 study, because it doesn't matter what happened in the med school or what happened in the NIH clinical trial or what the P factor on the statistics were. Let's say they got that P factor, 0.01, 99% confidence. That means nothing to you. Are you in the 99 or are you in the 1? Because until you try it for yourself, you don't know. So the only study that means anything to you is the N=1 study. What happened when you gave it a shot? All the rest of them are just hypotheses. Hey, we did this. We saw this happen to some Japanese guys on an exercise bike. That might be an idea you want to try. All the rest of it is just sources of new ideas.
Yeah, I like that perspective. It's definitely reassuring to hear that from somebody with degrees. So yeah, cool. And I've heard that pretty commonly. The more degrees guys have, they usually give guys like me advice not to get them, which is, I think, pretty interesting. Yeah, I was big on reading studies when I was younger, like in high school. And then I kind of totally flipped the switch and I was like, all right, forget everything about studies. I only care about my experience. I'm just going to test everything myself. And then now I've kind of found this like balance where it's like, okay, the studies, like you said, give me good ideas. They give me new things to try, and then I can kind of see what's up with that. I also like to collect a lot of data on
Jane and Kelly, science and experience. Yep.
Exactly. And I like to collect data with my clients too. I have them log so many different things, like from how often they spend in the sun, whether they were wearing clothes, what areas of the body gets in the sun, how often they're ejaculating, we use the app Chronometer. So they log all of their meals and it tracks all of the micronutrients and macronutrients in their foods. So we can see like throughout the week, like what week they had better food, what week they were deficient in whatever, and then see how that correlates to their blood work. And it's been really helpful to see that through my clients. The toughest part is just to get them to commit to logging everything accurately and consistently. But it's,
Yeah, compliance with the food diaries and stuff. It's trouble. Yep.
Yeah. Once you get them into a routine, I've switched from a longer program, like a 12-week program, now down to a 9-day program. So my job is pretty much to get them in the routine so they can continue on their own after the program, as opposed to like once a week being like, how'd you guys do this week? Were you on point? It's like 9 days in a row. You're on the routine. You're logging everything 9 days in a row. And then I feel like once you get anything into a routine and it becomes a habit and a pattern, it's easier to keep it going.
Agreed. It hardly takes any energy. You're like doing it on autopilot.
Exactly. Like for me now, it feels weird to eat something and not put it in the chronometer. Even though I have a pretty good gauge on like what my intake is and I kind of know what I need to eat in order to hit my targets, I still am like, you know what, let me just do it anyway. Like it's for the habit. I get like the mental satisfaction that it's in there and the log is there. And then, I mean, long-term, like 2-3 years from now, I can look at the long-term data and really see like, I feel like the more data you have on yourself, the more you can learn about yourself. So I'm a huge advocate. Like I try to track everything I could possibly track these days so that I can look back on it.
I did the same thing with my son. I still have his blood sugar journals from, back in 2002. We would track his exercise, his diet, his insulin, his blood sugars, everything. And then I would go meet with a nutritionist or a dietitian or something, and they would try and tell me crap like protein cannot increase your blood sugar. And I'm like, oh, no, wait. Now, so, here it is. And here's where he had the cheeseburger with no bun. And then 4 hours later, this is where we had to give him some extra H because of and now we've learned to match the protein with the MPH because that's the later acting. And that's what the curve looks like. And that didn't happen. As if like all my data didn't happen because they didn't have a textbook that told them this thing that I experienced with my son actually happened to us. I'm like, that's when I stopped going to dietitians and nutritionists.
Makes sense. My dad had an interesting thing too with the cortisol with gluconeogenesis from working out. He was, I was teaching him about how, cortisol signals for gluconeogenesis. So the cortisol spike from working out, if you're not eating any carbs, your blood sugar is going to go up anyway because you need the glucose regardless. So that was like a pop popper for him. Or a top popper. He started noticing it. He has one of those continuous glucose monitors, the one that goes in your arm.
Nice.
And it continues to check so he can see his stuff. And he was saying like, every time I work out without eating, I still, it still goes up. Cortisol still spikes it every time. So now he like jokes around with me about it. He's like, oh, my cortisol went up. I'm high again.
It surprises a lot of people to see that reaction because they've been taught that their blood glucose is a function of the carbs they eat. And that's true, but it's incomplete. Your liver stores glycogen. And when you're activated, that fight or flight response, your liver will release glycogen into your bloodstream to spike your blood glucose just in case your muscles need it.
Yeah, and they do. If you're not eating any carbs and you're lifting heavy, they definitely need it. I've been a huge advocate for intra-workout carb consumption. So personally, I put maple syrup in my water while I work out, and I drink that mid-workout to mitigate that cortisol spike. I saw this one study, I forget who it was by, when it was from, but I remember the details of it. So basically, they had two groups. One group, they did the same 12-week like weightlifting program. One group worked out fasted with no intra-workout drink. They only drank water. It was like a placebo. And then the other group still worked out fasted, but drank sugar water, basically cane sugar in their water throughout their workouts. And they measured the difference in cortisol and the difference in their fast twitch muscle fiber and slow twitch muscle fiber growth. And what was interesting is the group that drank the sugar water had only a 7% increase post-workout for cortisol, and the water group had a 97% increase in cortisol. And their difference in muscle building throughout that period was pretty significant. The group that drank the sugar increased fast twitch muscle fiber by like 20-something percent, 24%, I think it was. I don't remember that number. Somewhere 20-something. And then the other group actually, I want to say they like lost 0.1% fast twitch muscle fiber. And I mean, they were working out fasted, so obviously, none of them are getting enough protein, but that mitigation of cortisol was able to, give them a pretty significant, advantage over the other group, which I found interesting. So then after that, I was, all right, I'm going to do sugar water. I tried honey. Wasn't a big fan of like cane sugar or just like plain sugar. So I was like, all right, honey.
Yeah, me either. I like the maple syrup angle better.
Yeah. Honey clumps at the bottom of your cold water bottle. So it's not really like convenient. And then maple syrup ended up being the thing that was working for me. And I also would drink, at the time, I was drinking raw milk, goat milk at the gym mid-workout with maple syrup in it, milk and maple syrup. If you never tried it,
Okay, that sounds delicious.
It's a banger. So that was what I was doing at the time. And that was what like I was doing pretty much every single day while I was working out during that period of time where I put on all this weight. But I was in the gym pretty much every single day, full body workouts. I was doing a lot of other things at the same time, but the intra workout carbs was huge for me. I've honestly been pretty against keto for a pretty long time. It's pretty much the only like diet that I haven't tried is reducing carbohydrates. I've never really done it for more than, while I was fasting on water. That was really the only time I ever went without carbs, which I found interesting for myself. Like in retrospect,
let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, we can dive into that.
There's dirty keto. You can eat you can be keto and eat a ton of seed oils and ultra processed crap. Like they'll, keto ice cream or keto peanut butter cups or all this stuff that's chock full of sugar, alcohols. There's a difference between keto and what Saladino would call animal-based, or what Sean Baker would call carnivore. I am not in favor of highly processed keto. However, there are so many people who are so metabolically dysregulated, keto helps them because keto will improve their insulin sensitivity. It will improve their brain function. I just read a paper, there's a certain kind of T cell, part of your immune system, that runs way better on ketones than it does on glucose. Keto is healthy in many respects, that even if they're dipping into the ultra processed aluminum foil packaged crap, just getting the excessive carbs out of their diet is going to give them a big improvement. The next step would be to go more animal-based, get the seed oils out as well, because keto isn't enough. But there's one population for which keto is really important, and it's the anorexics. Keto has an anxiolytic effect. That is, it will reduce anxiety. And that's why Chris Palmer writes about it in his Brain Energy book. He's a psychiatrist at Harvard. He was not making any progress with an obese patient with his mental health. And he said, well, at least maybe we could do something about the obesity. Let's switch you to a ketogenic diet and we'll keep working on the therapy. He noticed his patients who went keto got way healthier mentally. And it was a reduction in their anxiety, improvement of their insulin sensitivity in their brain that he hypothesized was helping with their mental health. Then he wrote a paper with Nick Norwitz, who I believe is at Oxford as a postdoc. And it was on keto as an anxiolytic diet and a way of feeding anorexics who otherwise just aren't going to eat. Anorexia is the most dangerous of all the mental disorders and one of the most recalcitrant, that is most difficult to resolve. So if you got an anorexic, whatever they're going to eat, I don't care if it's keto ice cream or, whatever the crap is, and it works for them because it takes their anxiety down and they don't feel as much shame about eating and some of their body dysmorphia softens a little bit, then I love keto. For most people, I think it's a way of breaking the standard American bullshit diet, of like making them more conscious about what they're eating. And they get immediate reduction in inflammation. They can lose 6 pounds in like the first 6 days. And they're like, this is going great. But I don't think that it's a way of life unless you're dealing with a serious mental disorder and you find that keto is helping you, stay the heck in keto. Otherwise, I prefer cycling in and out and going animal-based rather than ultra-processed Atkins bar type stuff.
Okay, yeah. Just to clarify, when you say keto in general, like, does that mean no carbs at all, or what macro split, like 10% carbs? Or like, what are you referring to here exactly?
Yeah, it depends upon the...
Like, I agree.
If you're doing ice baths and exercise... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I agree with you on the not like a long-term lifestyle thing. And most of the guys that I'm working with have specific like testosterone goals. But when it comes to insulin sensitivity, I've seen a lot of good stuff. I really love Sean Baker, honestly. And what else was I going to say? With insulin
He's great.
sensitivity, but with yeah, I mean, in general, lowering carbohydrates to some degree for a lot of people helps with a lot of things, like even lowering your triglycerides and things like that.
Yep.
So I'm not anti, like, I'm not saying everybody should eat like 60% carbs, but I mean, if someone is overeating carbs, I think most people's problem is under eating protein as well. And that when you eat enough protein or you go into high protein, you're going to eat less carbs just by default because they're more satiating and it's just more difficult to put down all those carbs or eat more protein. And then, I mean, a lot of things happen from eating a higher protein diet as well. And I would say, I guess a lot of the benefit from keto could also just be from eating more meat in general. Like I said, I would definitely be against dirty keto as well. When it comes to meat in general, I'm just more aligned with, like, my overall perspective is like, eat things from nature. Eat like real meat, eat real fruit, eat real whatever. And the splits, basically, whether you're eating certain amounts of protein, fat, or carbs, is basically just on your body composition goals or on like fixing a specific problem for you. So if you have insulin sensitivity, or insulin resistance that's like seriously progressed, then keto for a period of time, or like carnivore for a period of time, like only eating animal products, could be pretty solid. And I've recommended that to a couple people in the past, but it's not as common for me to recommend because I guess people with goals that are coming to my program don't really have those goals as much. But there are a couple of the older guys in their 40s that need some help with insulin sensitivity. I'm like, just eat more steak, eat more steak, eat more steak, eat more steak. And I usually don't even tell them about restricting the carbs. And they kind of just do it as a byproduct. They look at their chronometers and I'm like, oh, they're eating, 10 ounces of steak a day now or more. And now their carb it goes down anyway as a byproduct, and that tends to go. But I usually don't recommend less than 30% for a lot of my clients. I've never had anyone who's needed anything like less than 30% carbs. Usually it does the trick. But yeah, interesting. Okay, so what were you going to say? My bad to cut you off.
If you're doing your ice baths and you get your exercise, you can tolerate more carbs in your diet because you are burning them. So, what is keto? Pee on a stick. It'll tell you whether you have keto. I almost always have trace ketones. And I think that's because the ice bath stimulates endogenous ketone production. Even if I'm not in ketosis, once you get into the ice bath, you start producing ketones. So I'm almost always trace. But I remember Thanksgiving, I did a post. I eat the pumpkin pie. I love the pumpkin pie. And then it was a couple hours later, I'm like, I should probably ice bath some of that out. I did before and after. Before my ice bath, 2 hours after my ice bath. And you could see the jump on my urine stick showing that I went from trace up to like small or something like that. The ice bath produces ketones or stimulates your body to produce ketones.
Super interesting. Yeah, I've also heard from gluconeogenesis, you're creating ketones at the same time. So like anything with a
I did not know that.
That's I've heard. I forget where I heard that from, but it was a long time ago. You create ketones also from gluconeogenesis. I've heard people refer to the keto diet as the gluconeogenesis diet. How you're not fully in ketosis, where you're not consuming no calories, where your body is turning only lean body mass into ketones and glucose, but also the gluconeogenesis is the process. You know what gluconeogenesis is. So
yeah, that's really good.
Ketones as well. I don't know the specific mechanism, but that's something I heard.
Well, do you have anything else? We could do one more, and then I probably wrap up and go back to my book.
Yeah, the only thing that I wanted to discuss with you is your book, and then we're good. That's the last topic. So I just want you to wait. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I'm about halfway through this book. It's called Uncommon Cold: The Science and Experience of Deliberate Cold Exposure. And it's a compilation of all these articles that I've been putting up on Morozco Forge and some of the stories I've been collecting from the people who have been writing to me. And man, writing a book is harder than I ever thought it would be. It requires so much focused attention that it feels like I'm neglecting all the rest of my life. But I'm putting chapters up as I finish a section. I'll put it up at seagertp.substack.com. So SEAGERTP. And I've got a lot of articles that are there for free, but the book articles require a subscription. And then sometimes people give me feedback, which is great because I get to improve the chapters when I go back and revise them.
Cool. Yeah. For anybody wondering, those links will be in the description below or in the caption, depending on what platform it'll be there for you. So you can definitely check that out. If we're on Instagram, you'll be tagged. I'm guessing that's the link in your bio. So cool. I guess that pretty much sums everything up. I really appreciate your time. Really enjoyed this conversation. I definitely got some value out of this, so I hope everyone else did as well.
Me too.
Is there any other closing remarks you have for the audience, or where else can we find you? Your Seager TP, a number on Instagram?
I'm just Seager TP. I guess I'm the first guy who came up with that handle, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Instagram's a good place. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Substack. I'm kind of easy to find, Nick.
Yeah. So, okay. So anybody who's looking for Mr. Seager, there you go. And thank you again for coming on. This has been a great conversation. Great time.
This has been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Make sure you subscribe, comment, like, all that good stuff. We'll catch you in the next episode. Peace.